no.
Yes.
Bring the wine with you. See you. Bring the wine with you.
Good to see you. Me too.
The meeting will come to order. Good evening. Welcome to the, Monday, December 3rd, regular meeting of the Mercer Island City Council. We did not have a study session this evening, which has been a bit of a rarity in the last few evenings. Alec, could you call roll?
Councilmember Jane Brom. Here. Councilmember Debbie Bertlin. Here. I'm going to mix it up tonight. Councilmember Mike Grady. Councilmember Mike Sarro.
Here.
Councilmember Tana Sen. Deputy Mayor Dan Grouse.
Here.
Mayor Bruce Bassett.
Here. Thank you. And we move directly to appearances. So a moment where anyone in the public may take 3 minutes to tell the council what's on your mind. Please start by giving us your name and address. Stop with that. Come on up, Linda. Yeah.
Well, good evening. My name is Linda Todd, and I live at 5080 West Mercer Way. And I've lived on the island for a little over 25 years. Hard to believe, but it's true. I'm here tonight. Some guy, some tall guy. Some of you may know him. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Mercer Island Sister City Association, and I'm here to give you our thanks and appreciation for the recent wonderful support that you gave to us when we had our return exchange visit of 8 students and 3 adult chaperones from Mercer Island's sister city, Thonon-les-Bains in France. We're in our 13th year now of having this jumelage, and it's been highly successful and continues strong. Student exchanges like the one that we just completed, of course, are a major part of that effort and something that we're all very proud of and happy that it continues to be as successful as it is. And the first thing I want to thank you for, all of you, was for the wonderful, warm, and delicious reception that was held here on the day after they arrived, several hours late. Their flight was delayed, of course, coming in. But the 25th of October, there was a very nice reception and warm welcome here given by Mayor Bassett. Thank you so much, and many council members were here as well. And at that time, they presented us, the city of Mercer Island, with this beautiful watercolor with a personal note signed by Mayor Jean Denet. This is a spot right in the center of Thonon. I'll show you all, where there is a major rond-point, and this building here is a very familiar sight to us when we've stayed at the Ibis Hotel. So it's a very familiar place in Thonon, and a lovely gift that they brought to us when they arrived. I also would like to express our great appreciation for the fact that City Manager Rich Conrad was able to help facilitate the sharing and loan of Youth and Family Services vans. It was incredibly helpful to us not to have to organize several parent or MISCA members to transport people to the various activities and tours and picking up and dropping off at the airport. And we were extremely grateful, and on the board, the membership, and the host families, of course, because their jobs were a lot easier for hosting. The students came. They spent several days with their host student who had visited them last April. They attended classes for several days. They toured a lot of very important and major sites in the area and in Seattle proper. They attended special events at the high school, of course, with their host students, and deepened their friendships. There's lots of talk going on with our 7 students about how quickly and under what conditions they're going to be able to make it back to visit again. One of the students is even exploring summer French classes next summer in Geneva as a result of this visit. one of the highlights of their touring around occurred on the way over to Bainbridge Island. They actually were on the ferry on the way to Bainbridge, and the boat passed right alongside a big pod of orcas, and they got to have a whale watching experience at the same time they were crossing. And most of us who live here have probably never seen that out in the bay, but that was part of what they were able to experience. They also visited Telecom Village, Pioneer Square. Our high school band was performing, and two of our exchange students are in the band. And they went to a Seahawks game and were able to see both the Wynn and Mercer Island High School band performing at the Seahawks game. So they were thrilled with their visit, just as our students were thrilled when they were in Tonon. And we look forward to many years to come of further student exchanges. So once again, we really appreciate and thank you in the city for all that you were able to do for us as we work together, and also with high school teaching staff to make this a real success. So from all of us, a big merci beaucoup.
And thank you very much for all you do. Okay, anyone else? All right, with that, we'll close public appearances and move to the move to minutes. So we have the study session and regular meeting minutes of November 19th.
Mayor, move to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, any discussion?
It's all right.
Just a little correction.
Okay.
On council member reports, I believe it was council member Ciro who asked about the Department of Ecology's public hearing on the SMP. Do you recall that?
It was.
Which item?
Sorry, this is page 5.
Okay, so we're at it was the first bullet there.
Yes, under council member reports. Ciro, not Grady.
Well,
No.
Councilmember Grady asked about it, about how the hearing went.
And
Then Councilmember Cerro asked if the city manager could extend the period.
it does reflect that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll read more carefully next time. Thanks.
All right. All in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, minutes are done. Consent calendar. Anybody want to pull payables or payroll off the consent calendar?
No, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent calendar
Excellent.
as written.
Second.
Thank you. All right. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries too. Thank you. Move to regular business. So first item of regular business is Agenda Bill 4790, the 2013-2014 final budget adoption. Chip?
Good evening. For the record, your Finance Director, Chip Porter. So we're at the end of the budget process. You've had your debates, your discussion, and what's before you is the biennial ordinance for the 2013-2014 biennium. So I have nothing more to add. I'm sure you're sick of listening to me go on and on about the budgets.
I was thinking maybe we could do the whole thing over again.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think Mike's got a list.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to adopt ordinance number 12-16, which adopts a biennial budget for the city of Mercer Island, Washington for the years 2013 to 2014.
Second.
I've got the wrong agenda bill here in front of me. I jumped over
Do you
it.
have something more you want to present on this, Chip, or you just,
Oh,
None.
don't do that.
you're just pushing that?
We're running the
thing?
fast offense.
For the next agenda bill.
All right. Is there any discussion? You warned me?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Have at it.
All right. I hope it's not a surprise that I'm not going to vote for this budget. I think, given the minutes from what we just approved, you'll see there are a lot of tax increases that I voted against. And I believe this is the single most important vote our council takes. And for this reason, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask your patience and permission for approximately 8 minutes, 34 seconds on this subject.
Are you giving me the option?
Yes, you are the mayor, Mr. Mayor.
Carry on.
Thank you,
Carry
Mr.
on.
Mayor and council members. I want to separate my appreciation and recognition to the staff in consolidating this 700-page document, which it's on the computer, but it's 700 pages, from my dissension and opinion of this, of the budget policy. Once again, the mechanics of the budget and the accommodation in answering my numerous inquiries by Director Corder, Deputy Director Lake, and Accounting Manager Tuttle have been top-notch. I thank you for your patience and expertise in that. Mr. Mayor and Council, simply the magnitude of this agenda, $110,035,873, suggests some appropriateness in having a prepared discussion. So thank you for giving me this time. Developing the biennial budget is in my opinion, the single most important duty of the council. The budget guides the city staff and the project and services that our staff executes, and therefore our citizens receive or don't receive for the next 2 years. In general, our citizens truly entrust us with this responsibility. I personally have received very little feedback, and there has been very little feedback directed to the council mailbox, which I think everyone can attest. We are the representatives, and it is up to us in using our good judgment in improving this budget. In one sentence, this is an extreme budget. It's over 14% larger than the last adopted budget. If ever the council should want to arrest the city's growth and, by extension, improve the city's efficiency and economic model to live within the natural growth of businesses and natural improvement of our citizens' lot, we need to better understand the process. The first improvement is simply vocabulary. I'll employ the national or the normal person standard, NPS, is what I'm calling it. That is a normal person standard where, for instance, an increase is an increase, and more importantly, a decrease is a decrease versus a decrease and an increase. Other is how we use revenue enhancement. Revenue enhancement is code for tax increase. There are many other examples. My story on this process starts back to the 2011-2012 general fund budget. As is the practice, the council gives guidance to the city manager for the upcoming budget at the June mini planning session. At the June 2010 mini planning session, the council clearly directed, ordered, voted, quote, to address the projected general fund deficits exclusively on the expenditure side, unquote. Pretty clear guidance, i.e., quote, exclusively on the expenditure side, close quote. By the normal person standard, the council should have expected a preliminary budget with no revenue enhancements, i.e., no taxes or rate increases. What received was significantly different. I missed the meeting directing that the preliminary budget to be balanced, quote, exclusively on the expenditure side, unquote, would mean 9.5% increase in water rates, 9.5% increase in sewer rates, and a 3.3% increase in stormwater rates. A small increase in EMS rates, a proposition of a new transportation benefit district, plus increases in community center room fees, raising building permit fees, raising fire marshal fees, and inventing a new ambulance transport fee. How does my English fail me in thinking that, quote, exclusively on the expenditure side, unquote, means anything other than presenting balanced budget without raising taxes? During this cycle now, at the June 2012 mini planning session, we had a new council with new members. New members that I observed worked very hard and sacrificed significant personal time to get on the council. That council directed the city manager to present a balanced budget with a 50-50, budget with a, quote, 50-50 strategy to balance the budget. 50% expenditure cuts and 50% new revenue, close quote. Again, I'll invoke the normal person standard that a 50-50 strategy means for every dollar taken from our citizens, i.e. taxes, fees, rates, an equal amount would be recognized in expenditure cuts. What silliness to assume the council was not talking about net. What silliness not to net increases with decreases. As in the post-June 2010 mini planning session, I evidently missed the meeting interpreting the real meaning of, quote, exclusively on the expenditure side, close quote, to the balanced budget, to balance the budget. I also missed, evidently, the post-June 2012 mini planning schedule meeting interpreting the council's direction to present a balanced budget with, quote, 50% expenditure cuts and 50% new revenue, close quote. The preliminary budget baseline, not 50-50 revenue to cuts, but 50 plus 50, i.e. 50% revenue plus 50% increases. That is roughly $3 million in new taxes, and yes, $2.3 million in cuts, but what of the $5 million in increases? Surely council's 50-50 strategy to balance the budget, 50% expenditure cuts and 50% new revenue, was not interpreted as cuts independent of expenditure increases. I look forward in developing the 2015-16 budget. I'll diligently ensure I do not miss the post-June 2014 mini planning session meeting where our balanced budget mini planning session guidance is tweaked to reflect a different intent from that which is documented. Now, to this budget. Again, in one sentence, this is an extreme budget. This is not a budget of compromise. Judge for yourself if I'm out of balance calling this an extreme budget. This budget is over 14% more than the previous corresponding adopted biennial budget. Let that sink in. 15% compared to forecasted CPIs about 2.5% annually. 14%, 22.5%. The difference isn't coming from our citizens' improved standard of living. The difference is coming from our citizens' hide. Even though the city's budget increased during the greatest recession since the Depression, I appreciate and recognize the city's focus in streamlining and prioritizing projects and services. The city manager and directors had to concentrate in doing more with less. As managers, it's much more enjoyable managing when money is not scarce. Additionally, we, the council, had to tell our citizens that some projects and services just didn't reach the level of necessary for the city to function. In short, trade-offs, some easy, some hard, were taken. This budget reflects a tiredness of streamlining, a tiredness of prioritizing projects and services, a tiredness of making trade-offs, a tiredness of making hard decisions. This budget reflects a return to pre-recession days. This budget reflects a return to the false economics, returning us to the heady days of bloated tax revenue resulting from a bubble or false economy. 14% expenditure growth roughly equates to 14% additional burden on our citizens. Call me a realist. The Washington State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council briefed at its November 14th meeting that, quote, as in September, we are forecasting slow economic and job growth for both the national and state economies, close quote. This budget not only assumes a robust recovery, it's getting out in front of an assumed robust recovery. To get it out in front of a robust recovery is extreme. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Council, for your patience.
Is it appropriate to ask staff to initially respond to the council members' statements?
In fact, sorry, I missed the very end of your comments, Mike, because I was just I was asking Rich exactly that question. Chip, how do you feel about trying to broach first response here?
Boss, you want me to say a few things?
That'd be fine. Let me start, and I'll go at the highest level of some of the things I heard, and then maybe you can add some color commentary.
Actually, I would like, why is it necessary? There was a motion.
Because you've made some accusations, which I don't think are factually true, and staff's in the best position to respond to.
Okay, please respond.
At your mini-planning session this last June, the finance director brought to you a forecast that showed, and I don't remember the number, but Chip probably does, a projected deficit in the general fund of something over $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.3 million, something like that. And you had a conversation about that, and it was at that point where you directed the staff to try and formulate a budget solution in the general fund that was roughly solved half on the expenditure side and half on the revenue side. So that's what we did. And as the Next 3 months went along. We combed the budget for as much in reductions as we could, and the forecast changed both on the revenue and expenditure side in a couple of ways, some positive, some not. And in the end, we were able to deliver to you in October a proposed budget that came in not at a 50-50 solution in the general fund. It was closer to 65-35 or 60-40.
Closer to 60-40.
60-40 expenditure reductions to revenue increases. We didn't go all the way to 50-50 on revenues. We only went up to about 40. And your direction was in the general fund, because that's where the issue was. With regards to the utilities, you have fully vetted and discussed the utility rate increases, the capital projects that are the underlying driver of utility rate increases. Your utility board unanimously approved the recommendations, and even those increases you scaled back. So in the end, I think the characterization of this budget as being some sort of dramatic or extreme increase on the revenue side, that itself is sort of an extreme statement. I think it's a modest solution to a real problem, and I applaud the council for making some courageous votes and some very responsible votes.
Chip.
I just would add, you have to be careful when you add up all the funds, and Councilmember Ciro and I have talked about this, add up all the funds and compare the total budget across all funds. Why? There's capital projects in there. Remember we had Sewer Lake Line, huge $20+ million project. It causes this from year to year. And so I try to focus on, really get a good apples-to-apples comparison. I stick with general fund to general fund. Even then you have to do some tweaking within the general fund. There's capital projects, of course, in the 13-14 budget, and you've got to be really careful because it causes swings. A lot of those capital projects, or at least on the utility side, are funded by utility rates, as just mentioned. There are street projects, parks projects, et cetera, open space projects, which are funded by REIT, real estate excise tax, related to the sale of real property here on the island. So you have to be really careful when you're comparing those things. And government finance it's complex, and it's a real challenge to boil it down just for you guys, let alone the public as a whole. I will say just one more thing, that when you look at, and I distributed this to the council at the request of the city manager, when you look at what have we done over the past 4 years, 9, 10, 11, and 12, there was a reduction, and you look at, just look at budgeted expenditures in the general fund, there's a 7% reduction in 11 relative to 10. That was really significant. You look at staff in terms of regular FTEs and contract FTEs, there was, you add them all up, I think I counted 5 regular FTEs and 5 contract FTEs that effectively were cut or otherwise not filled in 11-12 that continue to be cut or not filled in 13 and 14. So there's quite a bit that was done by staff. And again, we work for you, and there is no right answer. You set the direction to us, and it felt like, as I can't count the times we would talk about a $15,000 cut or a $10,000 cut, and we would have a 30-minute discussion here in the council. Clearly, it was a struggle for the council, even with a lot of small cuts.
The 14% that Mike was referring to, that includes the capital dollars?
And I don't have that right in front of me to respond to.
But I assume it does.
It'd be everything.
Yeah, because obviously we didn't increase the general fund by anything close to 14%. It's probably less than 3%, I would guess. Those capital projects, of course, include the fire station, which the voters of this city just approved by a significant margin. So, so Mike's criticism apparently is of the voters more so than of the council, if I understand this correctly.
You know, I point out one other thing, stepping back and getting a little more historical context. Sometime in the last 2 months, I pulled out a document that the staff pulled together probably in 2000, whatever it was, 2001, 2002, with the adoption of Initiative 695, which was the repeal of the motor vehicle excise tax, and then the legislature ultimately adopted. That was a major hit to the city's budget. So we got staff together to give us a list of every conceivable, reasonable way to cut the budget and cutting services to adjust to that reduction. Many of them were implemented then, but I went bullet point by bullet point. It was either full 2 pages or some on the 3rd page of potential reductions. And not 100%, but nearly 100% of every bullet on those pages has been cut since then. This has been budget after budget of reductions because revenues coming into state and local government, particularly local government, have just been reduced year after year after year. Is there growth? Yeah, because we have a town center that's growing a bit, but is the growth much? No. It's mostly been about reductions, not just in one biennium, but in about the last 5 biennia. So that's why I say I applaud you for making some responsible decisions and raising some revenue. We've been balancing budgets on the expenditure side for so many years. It's both at the state level and now at the national level. We're all seeing the same thing, that people are starting to have to look at revenue as part of the equation.
Okay, others care to speak? Debbie?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. I know my voice is not at its best. There's a few things I'd like to comment on. The first one is I think I would be deeply disturbed if Councilmember Ciro was truly of the opinion that anybody who sits up here took lightly the decisions to raise taxes, that it was either without thought, consideration, or a close examination of what the options were to maintain what most community members consider an expected quality of life here. That's not to say there isn't room for improvement, but none of those decisions were made lightly or without consideration. The second point was through this process, it's been a very real learning experience for me, not unlike the household budget that many of us run. There are years when you actually have greater expenditures and less expenditures, depending on your ability or your need to fix major infrastructure items that are within your control. The roof on your house or your water lines, your sewer lines, and in the voter's choice, a new fire station. So I thank you for calling out that comparing what your income and year-to-year expenditures are is not necessarily a consistent representation of a policy or philosophy towards expenditure and taxation. The final one is there are no hidden agendas, I think, at least on my part, that I feel anybody here has. No hidden meetings or discussions. We've conducted this in an open way. I, too, have been somewhat surprised by the lack of feedback that's come back from the community, but I also take that and hope that it's an indication they expect us to responsibly address the needs and interests that exist. And those needs and interests pertain to their quality of life. It pertains to ensuring that we have a city that runs effectively and professionally, and I hold that in the most, probably is one of the most important attributes of sitting up here at the podium. So I thank you for your comments, but I do strongly object to any interpretation that these decisions were made lightly or without thorough consideration of the implications for the community at large.
Thank you. And you're not to speak much more this evening, or you won't be speaking at all. All right, anyone else? Mike.
Mike, thanks for your comments. I appreciate it, and all the thought you put into it. And, I think you can appreciate the fact that, I'm the last one that wants to raise rates on anything. But having been on the utility board, I do have to say that, in particular, they've done a great job in finding ways to streamline their operations, look at capital expenditures, and look at ways that we can find a way to give, particularly people on fixed incomes, a little relief. And that's really where my heart lies, is what can we do for, a number of people that live on Mercer Island that are on fixed incomes and are really struggling to get by, but they really love to live here. When I look at what we've done with the operating budget for parks in particular. Again, I think that management has done a really good job of finding ways to cut costs at every opportunity and find ways to enhance safety in some of our parks, like getting the lifeguards back at some of the local parks in my neighborhood. And I guess the last thing is, to me, it's a compromise. I don't agree with everything that's in the budget. I don't agree to kind of whittle away at employee benefits. I don't particularly agree to increase property taxes. But, as I look at the whole package, to me, it makes sense. And it makes sense for those particularly on fixed incomes, because we're enhancing, in some cases, the level of service, particularly in our parks, and we're finding ways to keep services that we currently have at or above current levels. So I know it's, in certain respects, is a hard pill to swallow, and I apologize to those where we have increased rates a little bit, but trust me, we've done everything we can to keep that impact as minimal as possible. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mike, for your comments.
Thank you, Mike. Dan, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be less charitable, Mike, because in the comments response to you, we've gone through a lot of work on this budget. At that June meeting that you referred to several times was a meeting that you did not see fit to attend, and as a result, your interpretation of what was said and was not said at that meeting is a little bit strange to me, based upon you not being there. As you've chosen to throw around numbers like 14% higher and $5 million higher, and we're intentionally misleading people by mixing capital projects and general fund, particularly when the biggest one of those capital projects was approved by the voters of this island, to me is very disconcerting that you would do that. And even finally, what is very frustrating is, having gone through this whole process, you've made a couple of proposals where you've suggested ways we could reduce the budget. You've opposed several positions that have been added, such as the sustainability/communication person, and you were well within your right to oppose that, and I think that was you can fairly criticize the council based upon your position as to our approval of that position. But every other position that you oppose, such as the assistant clerk, where you know as well as anybody the pressures that the staff is on due to public records requests and our legal requirement to respond to those requests, which is why we have the assistant clerk in there. A DSG position, development services position, which, as you know, is fully paid for by fees. So it's not a situation where it's any net increase of money to the city. But and then you've asked for a couple of small nickel and dime changes, none of which would have come close to your 14% or your $5 million numbers that you throw around as if you're a champion of budget reduction. And it's those kind of attacks, and you will do the same thing in your newsletter, I'm sure. You'll put out this information, you'll use these wild numbers, and it undermines the credibility of the institution through misinformation. And that, to me, is really unfortunate, because we can sit here and have a good, thorough political discussion, and we can intellectually go back and forth, but if at the end of that discussion, one of us sits here and says, and throws out numbers and throws out accusations which have absolutely no foundation in fact, then it undermines everything we do here. And a lot of us spend a lot of time working on this stuff, just like you, spends a lot of time working on this stuff, and we owe it to the people and we owe it to this institution to maintain our integrity throughout this whole thing. And that means being factual in what we say, not distorting the information. And I personally, I find that offensive that that's the direction you've got tonight in your 8 minutes and 34 seconds.
Tana or Jane, Mike, I'm coming back to you. I know you're going to have some rebuttal, but I'm making sure everybody else has a chance here first. Either of you? No? Okay. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Deputy Mayor, I appreciate your opinion on that. Not at all surprising. The only thing I'd just like to state is that all my numbers are strictly from agenda items, are taken directly from staff presentations. The 14%, for instance, was taken from the 2010 budget that we approved the same time 2 years ago. It was $96,267,732 compared to the number 110,35,873 is roughly 14.3%. So every number that I've ever used in the 5 years that I've been on the council normally is footnoted, if not footnoted, certainly is taken directly from agenda packet material. That which is provided, that which is briefed to you or presented to you via the agenda. But we're 7 different folks with 7 different perspectives, 7 different opinions, and that's what we get paid the big bucks to do, is express our opinions on things like this. So.
Well, I'll have my 2 cents worth here for just a moment. Chip, you presented numbers at the beginning of this process that showed that our general fund budget over the last 8 years or so has been flat. You correct me if I've got that a little bit wrong, but on an inflation-corrected basis, we saw a graph at the beginning of this process that said
in the budget message.
In the budget message, we have been flat on our spending for, and I believe it was 8 years, but
I can't speak to 8 in my head. Rich is nodding yes. I'm just forgetting 6 for sure.
Okay. So 6 is the right number. But at any rate, the point being, we have been pretty darn frugal with the people's money in terms of what we have been doing with it. Debbie's pulling up those numbers. If you want to correct me, you can feel free to do that. And in this budget cycle, saying that it was time to have a split between the revenue and expenditure side of the equation as we tried to solve approximately $1 million gap that we had, I believe and I'm very confident was a sensible decision on our part to try and retain the services we provide to the community without cutting those significantly, and at the same time be careful with the people's money. So I think we've made good decisions throughout. I think the fact that we've had a lot of 6-1 votes on this council with diversity of opinions reflects that. And I respect Mike disagreeing with where we are, but I think that it does do a disservice to the institution when facts get thrown around lightly. And in addition, it's important, I think, to separate out the utility side of the equation. Utilities are their own entities responsible for their capital infrastructure, and it is absolutely our responsibility to maintain that infrastructure. By spending the dollars that are necessary to maintain that infrastructure, we're doing exactly what the community needs us to do. So I think we have made responsible decisions throughout, and I stand by those. Okay, that's my 2 cents worth. Anybody else? Tana, you want to go?
Sure. I would put out there too that when we're up here and looking at this budget, well, it's only a 2-year budget. I think our role is to look at risk management and safety for our community overall. And this budget, I think, does that. When we are spending or increasing rates on utilities, it's to make sure that we have water main pipes that don't burst, that we have pump stations that don't fail and then flood homes. When we have an assistant clerk, it's to make sure that we fulfill public records requests and that we don't, that we save money and that we save any liability for that over time. When we propose something like a new fire station, it's also to minimize risk to our community in case of a disaster, whether it's small and for one family or for the entire island. And so when we look at things like that, I think our job up here is to make sure that we prepare for to have an appropriate budget for the time, but also look long term. And I think that's what we've done. We've offset some of these increases where we can with an expanded utility, I'll call it forgiveness program, but where people can get utility relief. And where we were, I don't want to say unsure, because I think, again, 6 of us were very sure we needed a fire station, we put that to the public to decide. And so I think, again, when I look at this budget, we take into account things for risk management and safety, and some of these do require investments, and I think that these are all very reasonable and necessary ones that we've done. And there have been a lot that we have taken off the plate. We eliminated millions of dollars of projects that because they weren't necessary right now. They might come back in a few years, but we did very carefully make sure that we didn't do anything that we didn't think was a necessary expense. So I strongly support this budget, and I applaud this council for what we've all done, and it has been a very interesting learning experience. So thank you.
Always that. All right. And anyone else want to take a second shot? Jane, you're up.
I just want to really echo what all the rest of you have said. This was my first time going through a budget process. I've watched councils over the years go through it, and it's very different sitting here versus sitting out there watching. And it's been very difficult. I am glad that I wasn't on the council for the previous biennial budget, because there were some real difficult choices and some major cuts that we're still feeling the result of. I applaud the rest of the council. I think that the decisions have been very responsible, open. Not everyone is happy with everything, and that's as it should be. But I think on balance, I would challenge people to look at what we've done and disagree on balance, because it does retain services that the community has come to expect, and it trims here and there and postpones a few things. But I look around at other cities in our region, and we are very lucky to be in the position we are in. It's been a very difficult time. We're still feeling the throes of the recession, and hopefully we'll be coming out of that, and it will be easier. But I feel very, very happy with the way we've settled down on the budget.
All right, let's vote. All those in favor of adopt ordinance number 12-16, which adopts the biennial budget of the City of Mercer Island, Washington, for the years 2013 through 2014, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Motion carries 6-1. We are done with budget. We move on to item 4, Agenda Bill 4789, Fire Station and Fire Apparatus Replacement Limited Tax General Obligation and Refunding Bond Ordinance.
I'm sorry you're still stuck with me at the mic. Because we have some new council members, because we don't do this very often, I put together a few slides to walk you through this, or I can just suspend it and take questions. It won't take me long to go through the presentation. It's up to you, Mayor.
How much of a presentation do you have?
It's less than 5 minutes. I can keep it right at that.
As long as it's, yeah, that's just fine.
Okay. First of all, introductions. Let me have Deanna Gregory, our bond counsel from Pacifica Law Group, stand up in the orange jacket. And then Annette Summer, our financial advisor from Seattle Northwest Securities. These folks are a huge help to us anytime we are issuing debt. A reminder regarding the bond ordinance before you, and there's two options. We'll talk about that in a second. The original plan, as you may recall, way back when I was analyzing things with Annette Summers' help back in May, the plan was to issue bonds if the levy the lift passed, issue bonds for the fire station, and do what I was thinking would be a 9-year capital lease on the fire truck. Last council meeting, just before the council meeting, Annette looked at interest rates and I looked at capital lease rates and determined that it actually would be cheaper currently to add the fire truck, the fire rescue truck, to the bond issue. And so I mentioned that to you at the last council meeting, looked for some thumbs ups, and that's what I saw from the council. So add that to the bond issue. And that's what's included or reflected effectively in option 2. Plus, one more thing, what I forgot. I had a low oxygen moment, as I called it, at the last meeting, and I forgot to mention my plan was to take some existing outstanding debt, and refinance it. I've had Annette keeping an eye on this for me for over a year now, and it's related to two separate bond issues. The 2003, the LTGO stands for Limited Tax General Obligation Bond Issue. That was to finance the purchase of the Mercer View property where the community center sits, and then the 2004 LTGO issue was for the construction of the community center. Those issues have, the first one has $640,000 of outstanding and callable bonds, okay, and then the second one, the 2004 issue, has $1.135 million of outstanding and callable bonds. Annette ran the numbers and came up with $153,000 in net present value savings. This is just like refinancing your house with a little difference. Oftentimes when people refinance their home, say they have a 30-year mortgage, they'll refinance for another 30 years. And so you're extending the term by doing that. We're not doing that. We're sticking with the same terms that we have for the 2003, 2004 issues. The 2003 issue has a remainder term that goes through 2017. The second issue goes through 2023. We're keeping those terms. We're simply reducing the rate significantly. Okay? Let me mention a couple of things here. So just because we don't want you to feel surprised, and I felt bad that I forgot to mention this to you, we provided two options for you. Option one is doing the bonds for just the fire station and the fire rescue truck. Option two is to do those two plus refinance the old debt. Okay? Why? And what's recommended is we do a consolidated bond issue, and let me explain that. Instead of doing two separate bond issues, one for the fire truck and the fire station and one for the outstanding issues, is by consolidating it, you save on bond issuance costs. I get to pay Deanna less money as a result. And it attracts, Annette will tell you, that it attracts more bond bidders. It's a more competitive sale by increasing the bond issue. All right? Another way to look at this, I broke it out after visiting with Councilmember Ciro via email, is if you break this into really four components: the fire station, the fire truck, the 03 bonds, 04 bonds. I show you the bond proceeds, the principal amounts associated with each component. I then take the projected $100,000 in bond issuance costs and do a pro-rata distribution or allocation to each bond component. All right, then give you the total debt amount, which is the $7,018,000. And then I show you the bond terms for the fire station, fire truck. It's still 9-year term, okay? That's 13 through 21, 2013 through 2021. That's 9-year term. The funding source for that debt service on the fire station and fire truck is the levy to lift, period. Okay? That levy to lift cannot be used for anything else other than the South Fire Station and the fire rescue truck. All right? Now, for the 03, 04 bonds, okay, I mentioned the respective remaining terms for the outstanding bonds, 14 through 17 in the 03 issue and 15 through 23 in the 04 issue. The current funding source and future funding source for debt service is REIT, real estate excise tax. That will not change. Okay? So just to be totally crystal clear, the levy to lift proceeds approved by voters on November 6th cannot be used to pay the debt service costs on the 03 and the 04 LTGO issues. That's not an option. Can't do it. What we do administratively, while this is sold as a consolidated bond issue administratively with Annette's help, we break out separate debt service schedules, okay, for the fire station and for the 03 and 04 bond issues that allows us to track things separately so we don't confuse things. So we handle that administratively, but from a sales standpoint, if you will, we consolidate everything into one single bond issue. Questions on that? Have I confused everyone? Yes, sir.
I was curious about that. Where are the separate schedules in the ordinance?
Yeah, they're not included in the ordinance because we haven't done a competitive sale on the bond issue, right? Because bidders will have different ways of structuring the bonds, okay, and that's going to affect what the debt service schedule looks like. So I can't show you a debt service schedule.
But effectively what you'll have is, for example, you'll have $640,000 worth of these bonds which will mature
14 through 17.
Through 14 through 17.
Exactly.
So there'll be like a class of bonds, sort of, or something like that that you'll do.
Yeah. There's fine.
From the underwriter's perspective or from the investor's perspective, they will just see the full amount coming due each year for these consolidated projects, but internally we can allocate a certain amount of bonds in each specific maturity to each one of these different projects.
And so the maturity schedule will actually, the going in maturity schedule will be there. It won't be just a question of redeeming bonds early to make sure we line up with this schedule.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
In other words, if I look at these bonds after you've issued it, it'll be very easy for me to see a maturity schedule, that too, a maturity schedule, which I could pick out
Give you some bonding leave for that, too.
the 2000.
So from an external investor's perspective, the investor will not be able to tell which specific bonds they have. Internally, within the city or within our files, we'll be able, and bond counsel's files, will be able to do an allocation between those, and you will have an amortization schedule for each one of these projects broken out. But from the public's view, an investor's perspective, they actually don't care if they have 2003 refunding bonds or if they have the fire station bonds. They just care it's X dollar amount and I'm earning this amount of interest on it and that type of thing.
And it looked like some of these bonds are refinancing we can't redeem till middle of next year.
Correct.
So are we're going to carry double interest for that period?
You don't, as soon as these new bonds close, we sell the bonds and you receive the proceeds. The bonds that we're calling are taken off your books, and there's bond proceeds that are set into a refunding escrow. So essentially they're removed from the city's responsibility, and we've deposited enough money in that refunding escrow to meet all the interest and principal requirements related to those. So you're not paying double interest on them.
But you're paying interest on the new bonds.
Yes.
And you have to pay interest on the old bonds through the point of redemption. And you're going to have some spread between presumably investment earnings on what you put into this redemption fund or sinking fund versus what you're paying on the bonds you're redeeming. So you're going to be. That's why I was saying there's going to be some double interest to the extent you've got a spread there.
He's on like bonds 501 instead of bonds 101. But he's talking about the mechanics of the refunding escrow, and essentially what you do is you issue enough in new bonds to pay for the old bonds. That means any principal that's still outstanding that's callable, and any interest up until that call date. And on that call date, any interest that would have been paid previously is now forgiven. Excuse me. So that new amount that we're depositing with these bonds into that refunding escrow to meet those payments will be enough money to pay
I understand.
But the new interest rate on the new bonds will be low enough, even though there might be this new money in a larger amount, will be more than sufficient to overall reduce your payments from the general fund related to those bonds.
And I understand that. The only reason I was asking that is whether that $152,000 number that you got in the agenda bill takes into account what I think is a little bit of a double interest period until you can actually redeem the old bonds.
And that is, I got that number from you. That was 153,000 in round numbers. That was a net present value savings.
Yep, that's a net present value savings. I'm just going to a savings schedule.
I think, Dan, you're asking, does it also cover the cost of that escrow account?
Well, no, I'm not to worry about the escrow fees. I'm worried about.
No, not the fees.
No, but I mean,
dollars she's putting in.
my only point is you've got $640,000 worth of bonds that you are going to have to pay interest on until I think it's June 2014. You can't redeem those until June 2014. You're going to take $640,000, or what she was saying is you're going to take basically $670,000 of proceeds about, throw it into this sinking fund, and that'll give you enough money with investment earnings to pay off the $640,000 in June. So, but that $30,000, I'm just throwing out a number, that $30,000 is effectively the interest on those $640,000 worth of bonds. So I'm just asking whether that money is included in the $153,000 of savings, whether you netted that back out somewhere.
That number is true, well, that's a present value number, so your savings that's taken every year over time. But you will have some savings in 2013 as a result of doing this refunding. And I think that we can go through the mechanics. I think that what you're worried about will not happen, that you will see savings, but we might have to go through the mechanics to show you how all those work.
So let me just try and ask the really simple question. So the 153 that we're told is the net benefit of making this refinancing move.
In today's dollars.
In today's dollars.
Yeah.
That includes any double interest payment costs that we incur because of this.
Yes, and I'm just concerned that there really isn't a double interest cost. That's what I'd like to clarify with the council member. But there really isn't a double interest, so I kind of wanted to shy away from that. And that $153,000 is savings to the city after all costs have been paid, after consideration of interest that's coming due, and those types of things.
Okay, I think that's at least from my perspective, that is the main question. So thank you for that. Mike?
I have two questions. One is, when you look this up next year in the King County Assessor's website, I guess, will this be represented as a voters approved bond expiring in 2021 or 2023? Or will it be when voters look at the King County Assessor's breakdown, will it be depicted as three different bonds?
It will be depicted as one 2013 limited tax general obligation and refunding bonds, assuming you move forward with the refunding portion.
Expiring when?
So if you do the refunding, the final payment will be December 1, 2023.
Okay. Along that same line, then, so the taxes we get from our citizens, will that the first couple years from 2013 to 2021, will that be payments the equivalent for the fire station, rescue truck, plus the 2003s and the 2004 bonds, meaning that in 2021, or I should say beginning in 2022, the payments that we receive will be significantly less because will be significantly less because they will have already paid for the fire station, fire truck, and those fees will only go toward the LTGOs.
Hey, Annette, let me take that one just for a second. So just to be clear, what happens is the levied lid lift, $662,000 a year, is in effect 13 through 2021. Then that goes away. That ends, and they'll see a decrease in property taxes. Property taxes do not pay the debt service on the 03 bond issue, the 04 bond issue. REIT pays the debt service on those.
And taxes did not go up when those 2003 and 2004 bonds were issued in the first place.
Correct.
All the city did was pledge some of its REIT revenues to pay off those bonds. The only tax increase involved in any of this between today and 2023 is the levy lid lift, and it's only on for 9 years.
So in 2021, it'll go, or 2022, it'll go away.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Okay.
So you have kind of a step down in your debt service.
Deanna, anything to add? Okay.
Okay, couple questions. Debbie, you go ahead. Well, mine, new bonds, callable, not callable, why?
These bonds will be non-callable. The standard call feature in the bond market is a 10-year call, meaning bonds maturing within years 1 and 10. There's some call protection for investors. And bonds that would mature in year 11 and after would be callable. So for the lid lift bonds, the new money bonds, they would be non-callable because they only go out to year 9. You can, if you would like the ability to redeem bonds earlier than a 10-year call, you can have that built into your model. Just generally you pay a higher interest rate or an interest rate penalty for that additional flexibility. So if you choose to do the refunding, since they go out to 2023, you would have one callable maturity, which would be December 1, 2023, which would be callable on December 1, 2022.
And the only reason we might want to make those levy lid lift financed bonds callable would be if we had some expectation of a lower interest rate in the future. Can you imagine rates getting any lower than they are right now?
I cannot imagine,
Right.
but I've been saying that for my entire 15-year career. But rates right now, especially, are at their all-time low. I mean, we have not seen lower interest rates than we do today. So it's unlikely that they will get lower, but it's possible. The other reason why you might do it is for some reason you may feel that you will have additional cash that would allow you to prepay these bonds, and that one uses of those funds that you may want to use is to prepay this particular debt. So if for some reason you thought you were coming into some cash, that would be sufficient to redeem a portion or
We're
all
drilling
the
for
bonds.
oil down at Island Crest Park.
Well, I have a question. So if we took that callable option out, would we get a more competitive, better rate?
Historically, yes. Right now, we're projecting that there's only $140,000 in bonds in 2023, so it would be a very small portion of the overall bond sale. So it might help you a little bit, but it's not going to dramatically change your borrowing costs in this particular structure.
I also want to add that there are good reasons under federal tax law to have a call provision in there, just in case there's ever a change in use in the facilities, which, given what we finance here, there's probably not ever going to be a change in use, but there are good reasons for federal tax law purposes to have a call at some point. Pardon?
At the 10-year mark, we have the call.
So do we have a call at the 10-year mark, or we don't have a call?
You will have a December 1, 2022 call feature on these bonds, but it's only impacting one maturity, 2023.
Thank you. And then, Chip, I don't know whether you handle this or they do, but you're asking us to suspend our rules of procedure and move hastily on this. Can you explain to us why you'd like us to do that?
Just tight just for a moment, and I'll get right there.
Okay.
There's two things I want to call your attention to. I did so in the agenda bill. Let's do it here publicly as well. There's some maximum principal amount language and delegation language. Just want you to make sure you're fully aware of this. This is what we've done as long as I've been here. And so let me just pick option 2 under the maximum principal amount language. You look under the second version of the bond ordinance, you'll see on the front, the facing page, the $7.3 million is the maximum principal amount. But the amount that I need is actually less than that, $7,018,000. This is all about providing flexibility in how the bonds get structured. Okay, it doesn't mean we're going to actually pay more money in debt. It's all about how the bonds get structured, and Annette or Deanna can explain that better to you if you want to understand that better. Things involving things called premiums and what have you on bond issues. Is there an interest in an explanation? I see a head nod.
Donna says, yeah. Is this bond 101, 201, 301?
This is probably 301.
All right.
So the way that the city is selling these bonds is you're doing what we call a competitive sale. So essentially, before the bond sale, you're going out to investors or to these underwriters and saying, we're offering roughly this amount of bonds for sale with this particular structure, and we want you to come back and tell us what amount you'll give us for those bonds or give us the lowest interest rate. And ultimately, the selection for who's going to win the sale is resulting in the lowest borrowing cost for the city, and that's the determinant measure that we use to select an underwriter for the competitive sale. Within that, you want to provide some flexibility for investors to put together their lowest cost of borrowing, and within doing that, you can provide a range of par amount, and we also provide up to a certain interest rate that we'll accept. And really, this results in when Chip is saying different structures, it's a result of an underwriter or an investor not having to pay a face value for a bond issue. So bonds are sold in $5,000 increments. Well, an investor does not have to pay $5,000 for that particular bond. They can actually give you less money, or they can give you more money in exchange for what we talk about, a couponing structure, how they're going to receive their interest over time. And as a city or as an entity borrowing money, you actually don't really care whether they use these premium bonds or these discount bonds, either giving you less money or more money up front, as long as they fully fund your project fund, as they fund your refunding escrow if you're refunding bonds, and that ultimately results in the lowest borrowing costs. So with this particular ordinance, what we're trying to do is anticipate whether or not they're going to do premium bonds or discount bonds, and we're doing some math to make sure that they're going to meet within certain requirements that will also meet your project fund requirements and your escrow requirements. So we're trying to give the underwriters enough flexibility to structure the bonds how they want, giving them the ability to get the lowest borrowing cost for the city.
Thanks. That was a clear description of a complicated topic.
And I'm on cold medicine, too, so it's...
Hang tight. Delegation language. And this is a newer thing that we started doing, where you give Rich or myself the flexibility to choose which day to solicit bids. Danny, do you want to take that and explain what's the wisdom in providing this delegation language to us two yahoos?
I'm happy to explain this from the state law perspective, and then Ed, of course, could talk about the market and how this will hopefully provide some flexibility in terms of when you pick your date to go out and price your bonds. I believe the city's been doing a delegation ordinance for as long as I can remember, to be honest. But in the last couple of years, actually 2 years ago, the Washington State Legislature went in and amended the state law, saying that if you're going to do a delegation ordinance, these are the items that you need to put into your ordinance. These include a not-to-exceed principal amount, not to exceed true interest costs, a certain parameters around the price, which is what Annette was just talking about, whether your bonds are sold at a discount or a premium, and if you're doing refunding bonds, a savings target. And so all of these items are outlined in Section 12 of both of these ordinances. It's Section 12 in both. But I do want to point out that every one of these needs to be met in order to proceed with the bond sale and to be able to have either designated representative approve the bond purchase sale. So, for example, if you decide to go forward tonight with the refunding component of this bond issue, the minimum savings must be at least 3%. So if we don't get to that 3% threshold, this refunding cannot go forward under the approval that you are considering tonight. Same with the true interest costs for the bonds. If we don't meet the 3% not to exceed true interest costs, the sale will not go forward. And so these are the parameters in which you outline and you provide the authorization for the ultimately the bonds to be sold. And then I believe it's at the next city council meeting, Chip will come back and inform you all of what the ultimate sale results were. And so you'll get a full briefing on that. Now, this delegation is only good for 120 days. If for some reason the market does some more flip-flops and things happen over the next few months, and a good time to price the bonds never really comes before us, and 120 days passes, the delegation authorization stops, and we'll have to come back to council and either reauthorize or do some kind of amendment to go forward after the 120 days. So there is a limit within that amount of time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Debbie, you had something.
Yeah, I'm actually going to just roll back the conversation a couple steps, because I know it's in this massive binder that we have that I can't recall. What is the annual debt service that we currently have on those two? Or you can...
Do you have that in your information?
Hold, please. So it's, I'll tell you how about, on the 2003 callable bonds, it's between 162 and 170,000 per year, roughly.
And that expires 2017?
That expires in 2017.
Okay.
And then on the 2004 bonds, it's roughly between maybe 125 and 156,000. And that expires in 2023.
23.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a longer life.
The context of that was that the community center was paid for, its construction and the acquisition, the actual buying of the land from the school district, was paid for largely on just an accumulation of a variety of kinds of receipts above budget over a period of time. So we had, of the, I'm trying to remember the number, around $14 million. We had the vast majority of that accumulated in the bank without any tax increase. And that got us within reach of getting to the full cost of construction and purchase of the community center by pledging our REIT revenue stream to retire the remaining bond indebtedness to pay for the project. So what you're looking at is the last piece of financing to build the community center.
Okay, a couple just clarification questions then. So following the conclusion of the debt in 2017, we would then see within our REIT budget an increase of roughly 162 to 170,000.
You would have available for reallocation those
okay.
dollars.
Well done.
They
Okay.
exist now. They're just pledged to pay off these bonds.
And when we've been looking at some of the existing expectations of our REIT budget, have we taken into account in our 6-year planning that potential
Yes,
availability?
because actually the way we do that is we consider these annual debt payments as a project. That's the community center debt project, and it's in your CIP.
So that's
Francie,
6 year, that 6 year
yes.
already shows.
So exactly. It's just like any other CIP project. It's paying for the community center. And when we're done doing that, then those dollars can be reallocated to some other use.
Great. And I have one final minor question. You said it was 2003 to 2017 for the first one, and then 2004 to 2023?
So these old bonds, so the 2003 bonds, the only candidates to be refinanced are the 2014 through the 2017 bonds. They have a June 1, 2013 call date. And on your 2004 LTGOs, it's the 2015 through the 2023 bonds, and they have a kind of a split call date. They have a call date basically at any time. We're assuming it's in March of 2013, and then also portions callable in 2014. So you will have, for the 2003 bonds, you will have one maturity that will remain outstanding as a non-called 2003 piece. And then for the 2004 LTGO bonds, you'll have two maturities, a 12/1/2013 and a 2014 maturities that are not candidates to be refinanced. And just, I just wanted to make one point of clarification when you were talking about the REIT money, that based on current interest rates, those savings are taken over time. Basically, we're just replacing your old debt service with new debt service, but it's at a lower interest rate. So we're estimating your savings or that reduction in REIT money to be anywhere between $12,000 and $23,000 per year.
Dan?
Yeah, Debbie's question about the debt service is curious to me, not the question, but how the numbers then work. Just ballparking this, it sounds like on the smaller bond issue, your remaining debt service is about around $750,000 in the aggregate, and on the larger bond issue, maybe around $1.4 million.
Amazing math in his head.
No, I actually wrote it out. No, you said it 162 to 170 for 4 years, and then 125 to 156 for about 10 years, 11 years. So, which comes out to around 2.1, maybe 2.2 million. And then the savings, on page 70, which is what the other woman was referring to, which is the delegation provision, it says you have to get a minimum net present value savings of 3%. So that would mean 3% of that number, even on a non-net present value basis, would be maybe $65,000, and a net present value would be less than that, which is a lot different than the 153 that we were talking about.
Yeah, we're currently at about 10.5% savings.
So why should we put 3% then if we're shooting for something? I mean, I'm not saying you have to go right up to the total, but
Yeah. You can if you want. I mean, I think that we will by far exceed that 3%. I think kind of statewide or even regionally, we usually see a minimum of 3% depending on the financing structure. So 3% is a typical minimum.
if you, because the other requirement here is that the real interest rate on the new bonds have to be 3% or less. So are your savings, the 153, is that based upon a 3%?
No, it's based on current interest rates, and it's just about, let's see, depending on how you want to measure it, I'm going to use the true interest cost. We're about 1.38%. and the city's currently paying about 4.01% on the bond. So essentially, you'd be refinancing from just over 4% down to a 1.38%, pending the actual bid from the underwriters. But that 10.5% is based on current interest rates, not the 3% that's in there.
So, okay, so that raises another question then. So the delegation authority we're being asked to give is a 3% interest rate when the current rates are less than 1.5%, and I mean, I all for giving you flexibility, but that seems to me to double the current interest rate seems like a little bit of abundance of flexibility.
It can be changed. I think ultimately we are going to select the underwriter that provides the lowest cost borrowing to the city. And we put parameters in there that are generally favorable, I guess, to the bidding environment. But we do not expect us to meet the thresholds that are put in the ordinance.
Chip, when you did on your projections, what interest rate are you assuming over your 9 years? When because the levy lid lift is based upon an assumed payments over the period. So what interest rate were you
The
assuming?
average borrowing cost. I'm trying to recall. It was under 3.
My understanding was like it was like mid two.
It was. I want to say it was 293, but
Yeah.
it was. In any case, and
But I would think that at a minimum, we shouldn't be authorizing an interest rate which would be in excess of what you assumed the monies you needed to pay for everything that we're doing here. Yeah, I don't mean to be over technical on this thing. It's just the numbers are a little bit.
I think the important question is, at the end of the day, you will seek the best deal you can.
that's the bottom line.
And
Giving us that authority allows us to pick a good day to go to the market as well.
yeah, and
Other councils.
And you have no reason not to give us the best deal because you're operating on our behalf on this.
Well, I have no responsibility for the bids that are submitted. We are hired by the city to put together the best financing terms based on market conditions and place that out there, and then make a recommendation to the city whether or not we think that these are fair prices based on market conditions and those types of things. But
They're paid on a fee basis, not
Yeah,
based on
exactly.
the better or the less better of the
Yes.
final bond. So,
Okay.
so.
Tana and then Mike. I see Mike's on the right page at this point, so I'm.
I think we're after the same thing here.
All right.
Yeah. I'd like to move to suspend the City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading for an ordinance and adopt ordinance number 12-15, option 2, providing for the issuance and sale of a limited tax general obligation and refunding bonds of the city in the aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $7,300,000, to provide funds to finance the cost of constructing, equipping, and acquiring a fire station and fire apparatus, to refund certain outstanding limited tax general obligations of the city, and to finance the cost of issuing the bonds.
Second.
Great. And are we allowed to do these together?
No, you have to.
I'm looking at you, but I should be looking to our attorney here or
You have to
clerk.
You have to suspend the rules.
Correct.
separately.
Yeah.
Suspend the rules first, Katie. Don't you agree with that?
Okay, so how do we,
You have to disentangle the motions. Do the first
Just-
motion.
All right, so I'll move again, just suspending the City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2, requiring a second reading for an ordinance.
discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that carries.
I have to read it again.
Yes, you do.
Just wanted to hear my voice. Okay.
But this time we're a little more passionate.
That's right, from the heart. To adopt ordinance number 12-15, known as option 2, providing for the issuance and sale of limited tax general obligation and refunding bonds of the city in the aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $7,300,000, to provide funds to finance the cost of constructing, equipping, and acquiring a fire station and fire apparatus, to refund certain outstanding limited tax general obligations of the city, and to finance the cost of issuing the bonds.
Second.
Discussion.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm going to vote for it, but I have to say, I'm a little bit concerned about the delegation provision, because I fully get that Chip and Rich and our advisors will do everything in their power to promote our best interests, but, if we're the council, we have to authorize this. If they were to come back to us in a month and say, well, we just sold 3% bonds, we'd look like complete idiots here. So, and I trust the city manager understands that. So, but that's why I'm a little bit.
reason he might do it.
So what I'm hearing is, we trust you.
But why are you asking for the authority? And that's what confuses me. We trust you, but so why are you asking us for authority to authorize something that if you ever did it, we would be furious?
Well,
Isn't it just setting the sideboards?
I think I understand.
Because based on the legislation,
Right.
They're trying to put sideboards on it, so it's like a not to exceed amount. I think what we've heard is, they're not even going to go close to that. And I would assume that if it looked like you were, then you'd come back to us and say, guys.
I know my job. I am not going to allow the city to issue the debt when the advice is this is not a good rate. It's not going to do that. And I heard from our bond counsel that we are required to do it by the state, and we're going to do this based on good legal and financial advice.
I just wanted to throw in there that after we receive all the bids from the underwriters, we can see what those bids are, and if they do not meet the city's financing goals, we do not have to accept those bids.
That's good.
So.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Mike?
I just wanted to fold in my house refi.
It's a pretty amazing rate, isn't it? Yes. All right, Jane?
I just want to say, having felt really smart when we refinanced our house, I applaud the city for coming up with this idea of refinancing to save $153,000.
Additional.
That was wholly the idea of your finance director. He's had it in his head for months and months and months, and it popped out in the last week and made it onto paper.
All right, buy him lunch at McDonald's for that. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Chip, I suspect we've still got...
Still you, Chip?
You're going to get a break for me.
Okay.
And Francie and Katie are up next.
Speaking of taking a break, are you guys okay to do one more, or do you want to stop?
Do one more.
All right. Okay. We'll move to Agenda Bill 4787, Model B&O Tax Ordinance Code Amendments.
Thank you, Deanna and Annette.
Yes, thank you.
Well, good evening. You've gone from budget to bonds to B&O tax. So Katie Knight, your city attorney, along with Francie Lake, your deputy finance director. I have to give kudos to, where is she sitting at? Suzanne, and to Allie, our city clerk, who the four of us got together in a group and received this information from the state roughly a month ago and have been working to put it into a package for you so you could digest it easily here tonight. This is your Model B&O tax ordinance, and these are code amendments, 6 of which are mandated by the state, and the rest which are suggested by the state. In 2007, the city adopted the Model B&O tax ordinance as set forth from the state, and the intent of that was to eliminate the potential for multiple taxation by different entities, basically to provide consistency throughout the state. Much of this is an agreement between the Association of Washington Businesses, Association of Washington Cities, and the state, so that the state wouldn't lose that revenue portion, because as I understand it, that the state did want to try to grab the B&O taxes. So that's why we have our Model B&O tax ordinance as the agreement. All B&O tax cities, there's roughly 39 cities that are impacted by the B&O model tax ordinance, are required to have the same mandatory provisions, and they have to have the same effective date. Approximately a month ago, we received the mandates from the state with requirement that these be put in place by January 1st, 2013. With that, I'm going to have Francie go to the specific 6 mandates and then the suggested changes that the staff has gone through and worked on and felt were the best portions to incorporate to apply to the city of Mercer Island. Did you want to say something?
So tell me
Go ahead.
about that January 1st to be adopted. You got it last month?
We got it last
And then you have 2 months to implement this?
Well,
Or about 2 months?
it was roughly been about a month, but they were meeting with 5 of the larger cities, and although we had heard that they were meeting in some of the portions, they were meeting and they were talking about changes, we only received those mandates very end of October.
If your question is, isn't that kind of grind you that you only have like 6 weeks?
Well, that's part, and
The answer is yes.
The
Yes.
undercurrent is, what if we waited till January, what's our first meeting, January 7th?
January 7th. So I can hop to that. I was going to talk about that at the end. The requirement that it occur on January 1st, 2013, and all the cities received it at the end of October. So we're all in the same boat. And quite frankly, there's been a little bit of a flurry and backlash as to why are we getting these mandates so late in the game, particularly when the cities are adopting their budgets, and it was a scramble for us to put this together on top of the other workload that we had. That being said, should you choose to do it on January 7th, 2013, many cities are choosing to delay it to their first January meetings. Some of them are forced to do it because they didn't have the ability to put staff on it and get to it in time, as we've tried to do for you. There is some slight legal risk that that we might bear if we have it on January 7th, 2013. In part, it goes against the requirement that there be the consistency with the other cities. There is some slight number issues. If we wait until January 7th, there's potential some people might come back and argue about the discrepancy for that short period of time. I can tell you I don't think the legal risk is great. Our preference would be to do it now. We can get it into place on January 1st, 2013. The difficulty with this particular ordinance is that the 6 portions that we are recommending, hopefully you'll adopt tonight, you can certainly wait till January 7th. I'm sorry, I meant mandatory, not discretionary. The mandatory pieces are that you don't have a lot of discretion. You have no discretion on that, too. Because of this consistency requirements, the state has, in some essence, preempted this portion, so there's not discretion amongst the council. The idea that you might want to set it over for second reading on January 7th, 2013 would be to allow you, if you have additional questions as to what's going into place here. I'm going to have Francie go into more of the details, because I think what you'll find is that we don't think that there's going to be, we'll say, I'm not going to say any, but very, very minimal impact with regard to this tax on Mercer Island. So even though we have to put in those 6 pieces, and then we have some other ones that we think will tighten up the code and make it more consistent with Mercer Island needs, at the end of the day, we think that there won't be significant, if any, change or any impact. Does that help? Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to turn it over to Francie Lake to talk about the actual specifics of the changes.
Okay, so just to reemphasize, this model ordinance does not make any change to the B&O tax rate that we have in place for Mercer Island right now. The rate is still 0.1% of gross receipts with an annual exemption on the first 150,000 of receipts. There's a minimal impact on B&O taxpayers, and it's really just impacts a few taxpayers, and in a very small way. Just for your reference, we included the B&O tax rates of the 39 B&O tax cities in Exhibit 3, page 39. And what you can see there is that Mercer Island has one of the lowest tax rates, and I believe the highest gross receipts exemption of the 39. 6 mandatory changes that are made, that are in the ordinance, are made to reflect changes in state law. They are detailed in your agenda bill and listed here. I was not going to go into detail right now. If you have questions, we can cover those at the end. But I did want to say these changes, they're due to state law and really are already the way taxes are administered. So I'll leave it at that. There are a few changes that we're recommending that are based on the model ordinance guidelines from the state. These are really clarifications, and in a couple cases, they add an exemption for international banking, which we have one bank on the island that is international, and then adds just a few more deductions, which are really to the potential benefit to businesses is really very minimal. So I can go in more detail if you want there. Or we can take questions.
Carry on.
We did try to make it short and sweet. We would recommend that you waive Rule 5.2 and have just first reading on this. If this were something where I thought you had discretion on, obviously we'd be shooting for the 2 readings. But on this, I think the idea is that you have just an understanding of what the state's requiring. And again, we're happy to provide any additional information. And alternatively, if you do want to set it over to January 7th, if that gives you more time to digest this, to ask us questions, we can come back with more answers. Again, it's difficult when you don't have a lot of discretion because it's not going to really change what the staff would even be able to propose to you. It would probably go to the discretionary pieces, and the discretionary pieces that we've gone with the model guidelines, we think does just clarify what we've been doing all along and basically tightening some provisions. So that would be our recommendation, to waive the rules and adopt the changes tonight.
Okay. Back to council for questions. Any questions at this point? Debbie?
How much revenue does B&O tax represent for the city?
About $360,000 a year. Okay. It goes to the beautification fund.
Okay. Then I'm looking for a motion.
All right, Mr. Mayor, move to suspend the City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading for an ordinance.
Second.
Any discussion on that? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll not support, unlike the first reading that we had for suspending the second. I thought time was critical. I don't think time is as critical on this suspension. And also, if it was just the mandatory stuff that we had here, then it really wouldn't have made any difference whether we had a second reading or not. But there are additional non-mandatory, if I may, issues on this agenda that I frankly don't thoroughly understand, kind of out of my comfort zone. And it may be minor. It may be minor unless it's happening to you. And I'm not going to go out and ask particular banks or whoever may be affected by this, but hopefully the word gets out just from our folks out there being aware of what we're doing. And they may have an issue with something. Like I say, in the big picture, it may be minor, maybe a minor dollar amount. But if it happens to you, then it's not minor. So I would like to give our citizens, the citizens that may be affected by these other than mandatory changes, an opportunity to inform us and make us aware that, yes, hey, council member, it's going to have an effect on my business, and I'd like you to reconsider it.
And just a point of clarity on that, they're mostly deductions and exemptions, so they would be beneficial to the businesses, so just, but I understand that it's a lot to absorb.
And additionally, what I understand from council is that yes, there is risk, but the legal challenge is minor. So.
Other comments? I will add that our, it's, I guess, sort of a side issue from the one Mike raises, but our calendar for January 7th, our next meeting, is pretty well jam-packed already. So we have I-90 tolling as the tee-up thing, and then we carry on busy from there. So food for thought. Okay, we have motion on the table. We have had discussion. All in favor of moving to suspend City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading for an ordinance, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, carries 5-2. Anyone?
Mr. Mayor, move to adopt proposed ordinance number 12C-13, amending MICC 4.10, the business and occupation tax, to conform to the 2012 B&O tax model ordinance.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 7-0. Okay, thank you very much, Francie and Katie, and we'll take a short break and come back to third quarter financial status report. 5 minutes or so, a little bit. Rich, I'm going to start. All right. Hey, Allie. Okay. All right, we're back. And we will move to Agenda Bill 4788, third quarter 2012 financial status report and budget adjustments with Chip's back, too.
Okay, I'll be very, very quick. Because of budget, this always ends up falling in December rather than November, so I apologize. It's just too hard to pull this together. Bottom line, for the first 3 quarters of the year, the general fund revenues are 79% of budget. The benchmark, the threshold is 75%. Okay, so 79% of budget is good. Total expenditures are 72.4% underneath the 75% threshold. That's good. When you take those and kind of extrapolate and take into account some other things that I know what's going on the revenue side and expenditure side and do a year-end estimate, we're going to be just a hair below budget in terms of revenues, so 0.6% below budget. And total expenditures, I think we'll have at least 2.75% expenditure savings, maybe closer to 3%. And so that's great. What that means, translated, is we won't have to touch the rainy day fund, as I predicted back in the second quarter report. Won't have to touch it. We planned on touching it for $350,000 in round numbers. And also, when you take into account the revenues less the expenditures, we have excess, what I call net resources, revenues less the expenditures of $283,000. That gets carried forward to 2013 and 14 to help one-time costs. I mentioned that to you when we went through the budget process. I need that money to fund one-time costs in the 13-14 budget. And so that's it from the general fund perspective. I sense a question.
Rainy day. Are you talking revenue stabilization or the contingency fund?
Contingency fund.
Okay. I think we should start calling it contingency fund, because there are 2 funds out there, and they get, to me, they start getting mixed up.
There's a revenue stabilization reserve of $300,000 in the general fund. It's a rainy day fund part 1, if you will. This is the rainy day fund part 2, the bigger rainy day fund. Okay, REIT, real quickly an update on that. Actual receipts this year compared to last year, up 3.1%. That's good. And what's driving that? Number of property sales, up 3.4%. Average sales price down a little bit, 3.5%. The average sales price through the first 3 quarters of the year is right at $900,000. And in terms of the REIT forecast, the budget for this year is actually $2.18 million, okay? And we're now forecasting that we'll take in $200,000 less, or $1.98 million. And back in the second quarter report, we had forecasted $1.78 million. So we've had some, as Francie mentioned recently, some significant property sales in the second half of this year that's help bump it up a little bit. So things are going in the right direction in terms of REIT. The business that's before you are some budget adjustments. I always break them into 2 groupings. One, those that you've previously approved. Okay, we just need to go through the formal process of including them in a budget ordinance. The 1% for the arts for $4,500 for a public art installation that was approved by the council back on September 4th. And the Youth and Family Services, we were awarded the Federal Drug-Free Communities Grant for our CTC, Communities That Care program, $17,500 for this year. And so it's just adjusting this year's budget. And you approved that back on September 24th. The one new request relates to this hasn't happened that often, the water utility. The purchases are trending to be higher than what we've budgeted, so we just want to adjust water purchases by $150,000. That's just paid for by rates. And if that doesn't mean an increase in rates, that's just making sure we don't overspend our budget in the water utility. There's nothing, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a big deal. Questions? Okay, with that, we have, yes, sir?
See, are we talking questions in general? Or
yeah, questions in general.
Okay, on revenues, page 3, a big jump in property tax, 13%. You say because property tax receipts spiked, well, right. But why did they jump like that so much?
There was a change in their financial system. This started last year or they got a new financial system last year, and we started seeing it the first quarter of this year. And all that means is usually your payments from the city perspective come at 4 particular months: March and April, and September and October. And those are roughly really close to the same amounts. The way it works, apparently, is as they get in more revenue, they're able to get it distributed to the cities faster, roughly a month faster. So what is happening starting this year was March and September were significantly higher than they were in previous years. And that means April and October were correspondingly lower. So it's just a shift in the timing of payments related to their new financial system. So October, we're not taking in that much more for the whole year, the almost $1 million increase. It's just a timing thing purely.
Other questions? That's it, Chip. You ready for motion?
I am.
Okay. This one looks familiar. Anyone?
Mr. Mayor, please suspend the City Council rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading for an ordinance.
Is that a motion?
Second.
Please.
Discussion?
I'll not vote for this again. And as far as, again, it just gives folks an opportunity to review this once they see it either in the newspaper or through our MI Weekly, et cetera. And as far as the next meeting being too busy or any subsequent meeting too busy, I would think that this would be something that would put on a consent calendar, and if if the citizens hadn't brought anything up, then it would just go through the consent calendar and wouldn't be an issue.
I guess the alternative would be we'd change our rules of procedure so that we didn't have things that we didn't think needed to go twice come up.
And I'll pop in. My understanding of the original reason why you had the 2 readings was it's generally used for the land use items, and that on the less controversial ones of the housekeeping items, that's generally why we ask you to suspend the rules.
That's exactly right. And in fact, it was these quarterly financial reports and budget ordinance adjustments that prompted the council in its rules to say, on those housekeeping matters like this, we will suspend the rules. So if you don't do it on this, the suspension of rules notion becomes really on the table, because that was invented for this by the council.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of regardless of the original intent, I think it's a good practice. Word doesn't get out to the community as quickly as we would like it to, and oftentimes when the community sees things like this, it's the first time that they become aware of it is whenever we talk about it on Channel 21.
Okay, anyone else? All right, I'll just chip in. I think that something like this where it is housekeeping, I would be actually shocked if we had input from citizens on this, because it could happen, but therefore I'm comfortable with moving forward on this and similar kinds of things. I think that having 2 readings for anything land use or of a bigger community impacting nature certainly warrants the additional scrutiny that the public can give it. All right, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, move to adopt ordinance number 12-14, amending the 2011-2012 budget.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Very good. We move, thank you, Chip.
Thank you.
We move on to Agenda Bill 4791, discussion of tenant relocation for True Value / Legacy site. And looks like Noel, you're the man on this.
Yes, I'll kick this off. Good evening. Noel Treat, Deputy City Manager. At your last meeting, you requested that an item be added to tonight's agenda to discuss city assistance in finding a new site for True Value Hardware. I think, as all of you are aware, the site they currently occupy is being planned for new development. The owner has partnered with Legacy Development, and they're in the midst of planning a new multi-story development that would include a residential and commercial component, but probably would not be able to house continued use by True Value. True Value has worked with, they have a real estate agent, Jay Azos, who is actively working to find them new space on the island. I talked with Mr. Azos last week. I also spoke with Allison Keeler, who is a representative of the owners of the site. She has also been active in working with other island property owners and landlords in trying to find a space for True Value. So there's been a fair amount of activity with people looking at different sites, talking to different owners to try and find True Value a site. And so I offered to both Mr. Azos and Ms. Keeler our assistance in any way they thought would be valuable. They didn't have any immediate requests of things they thought the city could do to help, but certainly know that we as city staff are here if they need us and if there's something we can do to help move that along. We do know that it's important to try and keep True Value on the island. I think Rich today had a conversation with True Value's management.
I called the store. I was not able to connect with the owner, but the business manager was there, and let them know that we're interested in trying to help them in any way that we can, short of, we can't provide money for them, but maybe we could provide some moral support and information, and they found that to be helpful. They'd get back to us, and they thought what they'd like to do is just sit down and come up with a really good list of questions on things about how various processes work. And I suspect what that's about is permitting and tenant improvements should they find another location, and how it would work for them to prepare a new space for them. So we're happy to do that, and the owner will get back to me, and we'll follow up on that. And we would do that for any island business that is looking about relocating.
I think their paint facility would fit right over there, and then
yes,
tools.
Lumber.
Be very convenient for you, yeah.
All right, council questions, comments? Mike, and then Dan?
Well, don't take this the wrong way, but, I do appreciate us offering help to businesses on the island, but it seems to be a bit out of our league or business. Plus, Mr. Azos' wife teaches my son Connor at the middle school, so I want to make sure he's gainfully employed. But that's another issue. I'm uncomfortable using city time and money to do this kind of an activity, because I feel like that's more the job of the Chamber of Commerce or fellow businesses in town. And I see members of businesses sitting in the audience tonight. Having driven through downtown on the way home from work, I saw a lot of empty commercial space. And we've had the discussion, with the council about, gosh, maybe we shouldn't have the requirement to have that much commercial space on the first floor of some of these complexes that are being built. So I find it ironic, quite frankly, that we're spending time trying to relocate True Value, which, I frequent often, but there are so many empty spaces downtown. It seems like business owners and operators should be bending over backwards to find a way to help True Value, as opposed to Noel. And again, no slam on you. You're doing a great job, and any of the city staff. But that seems to be a more appropriate role, is to have that peer-to-peer exchange between local businesses and the Chamber of Commerce.
Dan?
I had asked this be put on the agenda following the Saturday meeting we had at Aljoy and the tour. And what struck me during that meeting was several of the legacy council members who were there observed that when the city was dealing with issues in the past, there was a more active involvement of the city, or at least the way they characterized it sounded like more active involvement of the city in trying to secure businesses for the town center. The concern, and I think all of us have received various emails on the subject, that there's a lot of concern about losing True Value, and because it is one of those businesses on the island which does make a difference in the sense that it provides goods which, if they're not selling it, there is no way to get them on the island with the remaining retailers, and people then need to go off the island to get just the little things that make life a little easier here on the island. So had asked that this be put on the agenda, it is, I guess I disagree with you, Mike, on what the role of the city is. Clearly, there is a huge interest among our citizenry to retain True Value. And if they should leave and our citizens come back to us and say, okay, what did you, the city of Mercer Island, do to retain them? I don't want to be answering them saying that, well, it wasn't our job, that we left it up to the real estate brokers and the property owners and True Value, and not sure exactly why it didn't work out. We've got some information why it didn't, but that's the way things go. So I appreciate what Noel and Rich have done. I think that's in a direct result of the Saturday meeting we had and the brief discussion we had at the last meeting. And I would strongly encourage staff to maintain those efforts and strengthen them to the extent possible. Because when we look at what we can do for our citizenry, making sure they can actually meet their needs on this island is huge, and there's nothing. I'm not embarrassed at all to be trying to facilitate that as a council.
Mike, and then I'll come back to you, Mike.
Well, I completely agree with Councilmember Grady. First of all, let me back up and let me compliment the council in delaying this discussion for now versus last meeting. I think that's a kind of a cornerstone of transparency, is that we don't throw something on the agenda the day of the council meeting. So going back, I completely agree with Councilmember Grady. I mean, should we also, to take one step further, I think it's inappropriate for the city to seek out a particular business manager and ask them, what else can we do? Although the city manager was wise enough and astute enough, any other services that we'd offer anybody else. Should we also talk to the Palante's manager? I mean, I'm sure she or he is very invested in his business, that business. What about Mr. Robert Thorpe and his consulting corner in that area? And then you've got that bike shop that sends out parts right next to where the liquor store used to be. What's our obligation to them? Well, we don't need to be in that business. And Councilmember Grouse, if we lose our hardware store, which I frequent all the time, normally I go there at least twice a day when I'm in the hardware mode because I forget something. But that's not our job. That's their job. And if somebody comes up to me and says, Mike, you're a council member, why didn't you keep the hardware store there? That's the business's job there, to find an environment, to find a place where they can make a go of it. I think it's an unfortunate circumstance that we might lose the hardware store as a result of this development. I think it's very unfortunate, but it is a consequence of the development that we might have to contend with. But we don't have any business spending city time trying to find a place for these guys to set up shop.
Others? No, sorry, Mike, back to you, and then others.
Well, Dan, just to counter a little bit, it's your perception that there's a huge demand to reach out and help them, and that's certainly your prerogative. But, I've been pushing for a bike shop for many years, and Sven and I were trying to recruit bike shops for many a year. But, I didn't, as a council member, start calling local bike owners and bike shops and recruiting them to come to Mercer Island. That's not my job. And it certainly isn't the job of the city. As our old colleague used to say, our job is public safety #1, and providing public services and making sure that the water mains don't burst, et cetera. All of the stuff that we approved in the budget is focusing on providing that framework from which a business can prosper. And we've done an excellent job quite frankly, in doing that. So I have absolutely no qualms about the local business community, and I actually kind of throw a challenge out there because I see business owners in the audience. You've got empty space in your buildings. I challenge you to reach out to True Value and provide a rate structure, rental structure that's competitive, and maybe even lower your rates so that you can keep True Value and other businesses like this on the island, keep them from leaving, and start filling up that retail space downtown. We as a council have approved many measures to make it very attractive to build very large buildings downtown. And, Dan and I worked long and hard to increase the number of stories that can be built so that we would have a framework for building businesses downtown that was very solid and was supported by public services, not supported by individuals at the city actively getting into the real estate business and recruiting businesses. That is a slippery slope that, as a council member, I don't want to ever entertain. Because, my wife bugs me all the time about, well, gosh, Mike, why can't we get a different grocery store? That's not my job. I'm sorry. I'd like to have more bike shops, but I don't get into that business. My kids would like toy stores. It just goes down the list. And so my point is, where does it end? Because, we all frequent True Value, but quite frankly, True Value is a national brand. It's not a locally built business. So I don't have any qualms about saying no. That's the job of the Chamber of Commerce. That's the job and challenge of people that we have worked with very closely to allow them to build very large buildings downtown that now have vacant space in it. And quite frankly, I'll bet if they lowered the rates on the rentals, they'd probably fill those things up pretty quickly. So, man, I don't want us to go on that slippery slope. It's dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie, and then Jane.
It's interesting. I find myself in a little bit of a personal quandary on this one where philosophically I think in some respects I might be close to Mike and Mike thinking that sort of that non-interventionist. But then I think about Mercer Island and the nature of why so many, in fact, probably most of us live here. And there's a sense of community, and the community extends from the neighborhoods, I think, to many of our local retail organizations. True Value being one, Chicks, the Mercer Island Florist, the bookstore. I think we all have a slight emotional reaction sometimes when we think of these. So rather than focus on the specifics of True Value, what I do want to make sure is that this whole concept of economic development in our downtown, pieces of which we've looked at in that 60/40 ordinance and the parking issues, but that broadly we continue the dialogue that was begun several weeks ago to understand, do we want to take some sort of active or more active role in this, but in a way that is not targeted at one or two specific entities? Because whereas we have a tremendous history in many of these shops, I'd like to think that history is not ended here, that there wouldn't be more equivalent shops, retail, commercial organizations that would be yet to come. So I very much encourage us to continue this in a broader level. And I'd say if there's two things that I've heard about so repeatedly in the last few months, it actually hasn't been the road diet, it's been less even the budget, it's been the True Value, and it's been Trader Joe's. Those are the two, and now tolling. But those are the passion points, which to me is really is quite interesting.
Jane?
Well, I'd like to echo some of what Debbie mentioned. I think, to back up, we're sort of at a point now where we're seeing, we've got this resource that's going to be leaving. We're going to have to go to Bellevue or to Seattle to a big box store to buy our hardware. But if we go, back up a little further, we need to do more economic development. What kinds of businesses do we want to have here? We are at the point now where we might lose this, our hardware store. I had the privilege of interviewing Aubrey Davis just a couple weeks ago, and he wanted an update of what's going on downtown because he lives in Seattle now. And I was telling him that the hardware store was likely going to have to close, and he just kind of scratched his beard and was quiet for a minute, and he said, "You know, you don't really have a town unless you have a hardware store." And he just thought it was going to be really awful if we lost a hardware store. Just as, you know, the icons in our downtown, the florist shop, the bookstore, Chicks, you know. But we haven't, as a city, invested anything in economic development. We haven't helped the chamber do what it does best. You know, we're defining now what's our job and what's not. And our job is not going out and talking to the shop owners or the businesses looking for locations. But we need to support the chamber in being able to do that, and we never have. So unless we, you know, put our money where our mouth is, we're not going to have the kinds of businesses we want. And ironically, it seems that we have, you know, a store that seeks a location. We have lots of locations needing a storefront. They're in the wrong space, the sizes are wrong, and I'm sure the costs, there's a big difference in costs. Just like the parking, we have, you know, the numbers say we have parking, but it's in the wrong spaces. So we have to look at these kind of dichotomies and try to solve the problem. We can't, a city can't go out and recruit, but an economic development arm of the chamber could look for businesses to come here and, you know, and do that job. But we need to invest in that aspect of what will help our town center.
Rich?
Yeah, just a couple of observations. Before, we haven't had True Value on the island forever. In fact, True Value was not on the island until the previous hardware store closed. No, it was just a private, I don't even remember who owned it, but it was in the town center down near where the Gull gas station is, near Rite Aid.
Yeah, that was the lumber store.
The lumber store.
Yard.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they had hardware too. It was
Yeah.
great.
So, lesson learned there, the market responded. They left, True Value came in. So if True Value leaves, don't necessarily give up on the idea that somebody else will come in and say, here's a market that really needs a hardware store, and we'll make a go of it. Markets do respond. The other thing is this notion of economic development. This is exactly where the council was about a year ago at its planning session, talking about. We spent a lot of time with Ellen Miller Wolf from Kirkland, who does this work for the city of Kirkland. It is a function of government in many cities. You have to resource it. So far, we've talked a lot, but it takes a lot of legwork, it takes a lot of time, and it doesn't always generate results. So it's usually why it doesn't get funded, because it's fairly soft in its mission and then its outcomes.
Mike? And then Tana?
Rich and Bruce, we had a kind of an ad hoc chamber council committee of some sort. What's the status of that?
Well, we have a council committee that has been working on some of these downtown projects, but we don't have any particular committee that I know of, Terry, working with the chamber.
I think we did say somebody was going to work with Ellen and Terry last year, didn't we?
We said what we would try to do is come up with a proposal for some promotional materials.
No, I thought it was more of how can we interact with the chamber to do the things that, you know, Jane and others have mentioned up to this point in time.
Yeah, I think I went back and looked at the notes from last year's planning session. It was largely around producing some promotional materials and not to spend very much. That was the action step. And
gosh, I thought it was more than that.
Well, it maybe needs to be. I think this has come up several times this year, and I think maybe at your next planning session this year, we should have maybe a more focused discussion of what role do you want the city to play in this kind of work.
But Rich, that was the genesis of that ad hoc committee, was at a planning session, and I haven't heard anything of it since. And Chip, don't we have a line item aren't we giving money to the chamber at this point in time? So
That's for
is it
rent.
like 15,000?
Basically,
the
we
rent
we
for the
pay the
office.
rent for the chamber's office space. I don't want to put Terry on the spot, so I won't, but I think it's a fair observation that if we're going to get, ratchet up our role in economic development, it will be done by the city. It won't be done by the chamber.
Well,
Because the
that's-
chamber
that's
doesn't
your
have the
opinion.
horsepower to do it. I mean,
That's your opinion, and,
Yeah.
you're entitled to your opinion. But, we've got businesses downtown that we've bent over backwards to help them build very large complexes. And, many chambers have dues that are well in excess of what we charge here. And they're used for this very purpose. And I've worked with a lot of small towns in eastern Washington that do that. And their economic development arm is, in fact, the chamber, and it's built on dues provided by local businesses. So it's to the businesses that are here, it's to their best interest to recruit more business. And it's really not our job. Our job is to provide the foundation and not to build the business for them.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I am not necessarily in the camp that says this is the role the city should take on, but I am clear that this council has talked about this a lot, and we're not going anywhere. So one way or another, we need to sort of fish or cut bait. Is this the private sector's job, or is this the city's job? Being in sort of purgatory where we're doing a little here and a little there, I don't think is really where we want to be.
Donna?
I guess I would start off with a question, and that this is all an interesting conversation that I'll add to after I pose this question of what are we exactly talking about the city doing? So, so I'll stop there, and then I'll reserve my right to continue speaking if I might. But
Dan and then Jane.
I'll answer that from my perspective because I was the one who raised the subject. It's starting out with exactly the types of things that Noel and Rich have already done, which is starting to make phone calls, and then follow up and sitting down with people and just making sure that people are communicating. Because at the end of the day, I fully understand that we can't force anyone to run a business on Mercer Island. We can't force any landlord to rent to somebody. We have none of that. But what we do have is the ability to make sure that people are communicating and that we don't lose opportunities which might otherwise potentially be lost. And we may accomplish nothing here, but it's the notion that I want to be able to say on something like this and that we tried, because it is an important thing to our community. And I philosophically, like Debbie, I'm probably in the Mike and Mike camp as to what the role of government is, but I also realize we're a small community with a very small retail base, and losing any significant part of it is something that I don't think the people would want us to permit to happen if there's any way in the world we can stop it.
Okay, Jane.
Oh, I just wanted to respond to Mike's idea about having members of the chamber pay through dues for economic development. And I know, having been a chamber board member for a long time, and Terry will attest to this, we just voted to raise the dues, which are very modest by comparison to a lot of cities, but they're pretty much at the max, and we're losing members when we raise dues sometimes. So I think, we have to, the reality is a lot of business people on the island, downtown, are struggling, as many are with the recession. So we can't expect to raise the dues to pay for searching out other businesses to come to the island or paying for brochures and things like that. I think it's just, they're taxed already.
Okay, Donna?
So thinking about what is the role of the city, I think for some cities, absolutely. In fact, there's been lots of articles about them lately about cities who've given money to GM or breaks to encourage businesses to locate there. So I do think that it can be a role of government. So I don't think just to kind of uniformly say that's not the role of our city. Clearly, Mercer Island doesn't have money to give a certain tax break to a GM or similar in scope kind of place that would be more proportional to our city. But I do think that our job is to have an ideal Mercer Island. And if that means having a True Value, if it means bringing in a Trader Joe's, then I think that means that it is in our purview. And I would hope that if we, if we're going after our transit-oriented development and there are certain things that we really want in there, that we will be active in making some efforts and making outreach to those places. So I don't want this conversation to lead us to prohibit any activity that would attract the ideal businesses that we're looking for. And so, because I think that it's important that if we can lend a hand in any way. And in fact, I think I was somewhat, I think originally not quite realizing what the Planning and the Design Commission roles were, and kind of thinking that they were an economic development committee in some fashion. Again, this is the very beginning of my involvement in the city, and I'm just continually surprised that we don't have an economic development committee, and I would love to talk about that at our planning session, because I do think that there are so many components that we've talked about this year, with parking, with a shop local idea, with so many different components of what kind of community we want down in town center, and we haven't been here before. Mercer Island hasn't. It's not surprising we don't have one of these committees, because this town center is new, and these big buildings and having actual retail center is new. And so I think as this grows and as this continues, it will be more of more something that this council will address, more issues related to economic development than we ever have before. And I think if we get ahead of that curve then, or catch up to that curve, then we'll be in good stead.
Mike Ciro, and then over to Mike Grady.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. You know, businesses that we are looking for, again, that's not our business to be looking for. And I think you're referencing an article in today's Times or Wall Street Journal about governments trying to bring in other businesses, and in the end, whether it's a stadium or whether it's a GM factory or all the tax relief that these communities give, in the end, they get caught holding the ball without having return on their investment. I'm not pro-business, I'm not anti-business, but I am pro-market, and I think what businesses need is a clear field, as clear as possible, and get government out of that, get government out of their way within reason, and let the business animal instincts work for them, and they will make it work. You don't need to prescribe what businesses will work, what businesses won't. You don't need to prescribe, when I say you, fellow council members, with all due respect, you don't need to prescribe what businesses the island needs. You don't need to prescribe what businesses the island doesn't need. The market, the forces, the demands out there for services and products, they'll find a way to make it work if that's what the market requires. And I don't think we don't want to distort that market any more than we already have. And I'll take it one step further about the chamber. You know, that's the chamber's business, and I think we distort, no offense, Terry, and I think I've mentioned this before on other budgets. You know, I think it's inappropriate that we subsidize the chamber for that $15,000 for their rent. The chamber should get all of their funds from the business community to be most responsive to the business community. That's the way business works. The chamber has no business being a pseudo-government entity. That distorts the representation they give to business, and it also distorts the representation, the passion that they give to us in developing policy. So, I don't like cronyism. I don't like, I like to be pro-market, not pro-business or anti-business, but we do not need to spend resources, and certainly we don't need to spend what I'm assuming is a very finite and limited staff time getting involved in this thing.
We've gone on for quite a while. I've got Mike Grady, and then Jane, and then Dan, and I'm thinking that this is really a topic more for the planning session than for anything else. But everybody feels like waxing eloquent tonight. So, Mike, Jane, Dan.
Bruce, that's fair. So I'll delete most of what I was going to say and maybe just make a point. For those who were on the council a while back, you may recall, I raised a similar issue when Peak came in front of the council, because we're getting on a slippery slope when we start finessing the state constitution. Because you may recall, we can't extend the credit, nor can we give money to private enterprise for their operations. And if we do, we have to have a very clear quid pro quo for the public for what that is. And we were able to do that, I think, pretty successfully with Peak. And I know when I worked for the governor's office in the state, we did that with Pacific Northwest Ballet and a number of other organizations. My point, though, is that, Dan, I agree with you that our job is to help facilitate open communication, streamline permitting where we can, provide public services in a reasonable manner, all of that foundation work. But when it gets to pinpointing a particular business, then, if I'm, thinking of opening up a hardware shop on Mercer Island, I hear that the city council is doing all they can to keep true value. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm paying taxes too. And so can I come in front of the council and have the similar request? So it gets to the issue of who decides and who picks what business stays and who picks what business goes. And that's the slippery slope that I'm talking about. I remember when the current bike shop came on Mercer Island, they were looking for ways to do some additional ads along the bike route over I-90. And they got the pushback from the city saying, no, we can't give you preferential treatment. You can't put the little signs along the bike route, because if we allow you to do that, then we've got to allow everyone else to do that. So I guess my caution here is be careful what you wish for. And I think, our job, being the board of directors for the city, is we need to make sure that we keep a level playing field for everybody. And we need to anticipate what the unintended consequences are of an action like picking out true value, for instance. I mean, there may be someone out there right now that's thinking of filling that market, and we don't know about that. That's not our job. So let's focus on the playing field, keeping it level, and focusing on what we do best, and that's public safety and public infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane?
I'd like to clarify and correct a couple of things that Councilmember Ciro said about the relationship between the city and the chamber. It is not, there's no cronyism there. It is distinct. The city foots the bill for the rent for the chamber's storefront presence, because it is the information bureau. It is the city presence downtown. If people come into town, they want to know something about Mercer Island, they want a map of downtown, or they want to know where to buy something, they go into the chamber. And the chamber provides information. It provides a whole tourism rack of stuff to do in the region. You can pay your utility bills there. It is the city's presence, and that is what the city pays for to the chamber. So I wanted to clarify that.
Dan.
Yeah, just to repeat what I think the points that Tana raises are excellent points, and the ones that, as I think Rich suggested, we need to probably relegate to a planning session as to what the real role of the city is. My only point in raising this is that we have one immediate issue that there's a lot of people on this island are very concerned about, And I don't see this as a slippery slope. I don't see this as messing with the playing field. I see this as trying to deal with one specific issue that we have, which is that we have an institution on this island which is important to us as a community, and as a lot of people on this island, I'd say a significant majority of the people on the island would like to see it stay. And so all I'd like to ask is that the council just say yay or nay on whether we want staff to continue their efforts, which is basically facilitating communication involving the current operator of it and potentially other places, other property owners on the island who might be a possible location for this. It is expending staff resources. I admit it, that I acknowledge that, Mike, but it's just, that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for a big debate on economic development. I'm asking for either yay or up or down on whether we want staff just to continue their efforts and see where we get to.
And I think that's a reasonable request, so I'm going to suggest, Debbie, you got to weigh in here.
Well,
go ahead.
I think, to my understanding, is the city has weighed in. We can agree or disagree with that based on Rich's phone calls and the work that Deputy City Manager Treat has taken. Are we looking to say yay or nay to any additional efforts, or are we?
Just to continue communicating, just to continue the phone calls, maybe facilitate a meeting if that would help. It's just to make sure that everyone's talking to each other and that we don't the ball doesn't get dropped somewhere along the way.
I would actually agree with that, with the addition, I think, of what Rich said earlier, and that is, and for other businesses. I wouldn't want to see this in any form to be preferential treatment. If it does extend to calls, and I think sometimes the moral support is very well received, then I'm comfortable with that. But if it, I don't want to have to put a cap on it if it exceeds more than 20 hours of staff time or something like that. But principally extending that concern and that facilitating approach within, I think, what would be considered reasonable and professional, I can certainly support.
And, I mean, to be honest, we would do what the level that we're at right now, whether you gave us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that's just good customer service. We do try to give information out to members of our community. But I'll give you one sort of a comment that Noel made after he talked with the people he's talked to at the level that we won't go to unless we get a more robust policy direction from the council. In talking both to the property owner and to the commercial broker, they both asked him, well, what would you do that we aren't doing? And so the answer to that question, at least as far as I'm concerned, is probably nothing. We're not going to go out and become a commercial broker because we're not going to cut a deal. That's not our job. In fact, for a whole bunch of reasons. But we are in the job, or in the business all the time of communicating information about the city, our processes, what we know. We have geographic information. We know lots and lots of stuff. It's public information. We'll share it. If it's to their advantage in them finding a new home, then more power to them. So, I mean, that's the standard I'd like to stay with. Just we will provide good customer service in a way that we would do for anybody. And in this case, maybe we give them more. We'll give them a phone call. We'll initiate a little more maybe than waiting for it to come to us. But we do that.
Actually, I'm trying to figure out whether there's a thumbs up, thumbs down to be had here, and I'm not sure there is one at this point.
What I suggest you guys do,
it's clear to me that there's a planning session discussion, but it's not clear to me that there's a decision to be made tonight. Does somebody disagree with? I mean, Mike, you spoke eloquently and passionately. Are you of the opinion that it's a phone call and whatever we do for the rest of the world is too much? Do you want to argue that we need to downplay, that there's a thumbs up, thumbs down vote on downplaying that?
I do, Mr. Mayor, because, I agree. I mean, in the course of business, we're going to help any existing or future business that wants to come here and share information about what's available, et cetera, and make the connection with the local chamber. But, I think you sense where I get very uncomfortable is when we wade into a constitutional issue of extending our credit, our resources into the private sector.
So can you sort of frame the thumbs up, thumbs down for me here?
So I would say thumbs up on the phone call, but thumbs down on, facilitating meetings, gatherings, et cetera, because then, the note I wrote is, if we're going to get to that point, what's the hotline? What do other businesses do in order to have the similar hand-holding experience? And I don't mean it in a flippant way, but, we got to be fair.
And Dan, are you looking for more?
Rich, I hear what you're saying, that this is what you would normally do, but with all due respect, I don't think you were doing that until this discussion came up briefly at the last meeting, and maybe you would have gone ahead and done that, but you hadn't done
more
it
than
up
you
to then.
realize.
Okay, but you hadn't done, at least you didn't report to, when I raised the issue with you before, you hadn't made any of those phone calls. So
Actually, I sat down with a commercial broker, very specifically said, what's going on with True Value?
Right, but you didn't talk with, you hadn't tried to reach out to the operator of the property.
No, I had not.
Okay, so we do disagree on this, Mike, because it's not, to me, it's not just, well, we made a phone call and checked that box off and it's over with. We have an objective here, and the objective is to maintain a community. And as I said before, the majority, I feel very safe in saying that a large majority of people on this island believe that there's certain things which are important to this community, and that is having some sort of retail base on the island, which includes things like a True Value. So it is important to people, and it does maybe mean facilitating some meetings. It does maybe mean following up on a couple of phone calls and saying, anything happening now? Yeah, that does take some effort, but there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. And
So I guess I've got the question now, which is going beyond a couple phone calls to facilitating meetings and that sort of thing. Are you in favor of
communication through any? Yeah.
All right. All in favor of what he says? Thumbs up.
Only if it involves also doing the same for an Irish bar.
Oh, I like that idea. All right. Those in favor of Dan's suggestion that we go into meeting facilities.
Any business that's thinking of relocating or threatened or whatever, I don't know.
I'm going to end up, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to go.
Yeah, it's,
because I
That's,
don't
I'm trying hard to find something you could, and I'm struggling here to.
Thumbs down. I think this is a planning session discussion, and I think we're starting to get to the point where we're splitting a few hairs here.
Well, I feel that way too, but I feel like I'm trying to be supportive of the need to land someplace.
Well, throw it out there and let's do a thumbs up and thumbs down. Otherwise, we're just going to talk the same for an hour and a half at the planning session.
I think we can trust the city manager and the assistant city manager, too, to have some discretion to, they hear from people, they know this community, and, is it a meeting and 3 phone calls or 2 meetings and 1 phone call? I think that's ridiculous.
With all respect to
job.
Katie, I feel like there is a dead horse here. So, I'm looking for thumbs up, thumbs down. Dan's more than what is being done today is what's proposed. Who supports know a lot to carry on with phone calls and potentially facilitate meetings? And I'm looking for thumbs up, thumbs down. So I got 4, 2, and 1. 4 against, 2, and 1 up.
I think we need a structured hour-and-a-half conversation.
Wait a minute, we just took it, that was 4 down. It fails.
That fails. That's a different question from are we doing an economic development thing in a broader way, and that's a conversation that I'm sure we're going to have at the planning session. So, okay,
and I'm going to continue to have the staff do good customer service to all of our corporate and our residential citizens.
All right. Well said. All right, we move now to, thank you, staff, to council member absences. Obviously none tonight. Do we have any upcoming?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I will be absent on January the 7th. There's a significant conflict that evening.
And you're begging the question. You are begging the question.
What is Notre Dame?
And the contract is?
Notre Dame must be playing.
Oh, is that the night?
Notre Dame plays in the national championship, and I intend to be there.
Good for you. Anyone else?
You can thank me again now if you like.
Anyone else? And you want to talk about the 19th?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So February 19th is Mercer Island School District during the middle of the week of winter break. It's new this year. They usually don't have a full week. And so I'd like to propose to move that February 19th date, as that might affect many council members and community members and staff.
and I see February, is 18th the President's Day? Yeah. Is that why we're on the 19th? Okay. So 12th and 26th, if we slide it 1 week, or I'm sorry, 11th and 25th, if we slide it 1 week. Does anybody have their calendar? I'm not available on the 11th, I can tell you. But
that would not, the 12th, 11th, the 12th would not work for me.
I'm not available the next week.
The week of the 25th. Okay, so
the week of the what?
Well, so it's the week of the 25th or the week of the 11th. We do a quick poll on people's calendars for those.
I will be gone on the 11th.
Okay, as will I. 25th, Mike, did you say you're
I'm
not
sorry,
available?
no, that next week I'm available.
Okay. Anybody the 25th does not work for? Okay. Let's assume the 25th rather than the 19th then. Thanks for raising that, Tana. Okay. Anyone else, other calendar related? Okay, so we move to planning schedule then. Rich, you want to take us through that?
Well, we're heading into the beginning of next year, so you'll see the first two January meetings, and they're pretty set. So not a lot to say there, although I will say the executive session having to do with real estate, this all is about both the executive session and we will have a regular business item, and this is about the First Hill utility property. The only thing I'm contemplating talking about in executive session will be you'll get a chance to look at an appraisal. But all the other issues related to the marketing of that property, we'll do in an agenda bill in regular session and sort out a few of the issues and the timing.
And by the way, the other two executive sessions are related to your city manager's review, which would have been a December item, but we agreed that December with only one meeting and budget was not the right time to do that, so we pushed it by mutual agreement to January.
So that's going to be, January 7th is going to be a very, very late executive session. And I would kind of like to, for the council to turn over a new leaf, that when we have executive sessions are always very important, that we schedule it at the decent hour, and if that means having a small regular business session, then so be it. But so often we go behind closed doors, and the council is just mind numb, and we're just in a rush to get it done. So I just see January 7th as too many things going on.
I agree, and we can actually take either of the sewer code or the advertising in parks and reschedule. They're not time sensitive. I've set aside an hour and a half for the I-90 discussion. I fully, I think we can expect significant public testimony that night, so add an hour to that. We could just make this the I-90 and the executive session night and call it a night.
I think that'd be,
There's no reason why we can't do that.
And the First Hill property discussion.
And, well, that's right, because that's one of the executive session and the agenda bill that goes with it. Right.
And what you could do is if the others are ready to go and we're surprised by public testimony going short, you slot it in, but, or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's probably a long
That's
shot.
a little bit of a trick to.
Yeah.
It's more like put it on the agenda, advertise that you're going to do it, and then pull it off.
Well, that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Yeah. So then the rest of the planning schedule.
Can you read back to me what is on the 7th?
The 7th will be the I-90 status report.
The 7th will be extensive public comment, probably first.
Sure.
Right, and then we'll do the I-90 piece and the First Hill property
In public session.
in public session, and then executive session for the First Hill property appraisal, and then the first step in the process on my review. And then you can see on January 22nd, we've slotted in the follow-up on the 60/40 and no net loss ordinance. And then the schedule's pretty thin after that. It's largely driven by what you come up with at your planning session. And so I'm going to stop talking now and then let the mayor, well, between the mayor and I, we'll talk to you a little bit about how the planning session agenda needs to get developed.
Yep, so the planning session is, of course, our time to determine what's in the game plan for the year. And that really begins with us teeing up the various things we think might be in the year, and then having some first thoughts about them, trying to formulate what the plan looks like and determine what goes onto our calendar. So we're at the point now where we need to gather the things you're thinking about and get those then crafted into an agenda. We had a bit of debate earlier about whether send all your ideas or not. I think where I land is I'd like, if you think it ought to be in there, go ahead and submit it as an idea. Send them to Rich. We'll weed through it. The ones that are popping up on multiple lists will end up as major items. Things that are small and are only on one list will end up in the parking lot for the end of the meeting, and with the frank understanding that we just may not get to them at all, but we want to prioritize and make sure that ones that have some real legs get the time they need.
Love to get those from you. I'll send out an email tomorrow morning as a reminder, and I'd love by the end of the week if I could get your list. If it trickles into the following week, that's fine, but by the time we get midweek next week, I'll send out another email saying you got 24 hours. Part of the reason I'm going to push a little harder is we're going a week or even 2 weeks earlier than usual. We're going January 11th through the 13th, and so all of a sudden, the 7th is going to be a council meeting, and boom, we're in planning session, and staff needs some prep time.
We also talked a year ago about trying to not be just doing the tactical stuff this time around, talk about some vision. I'm all ears if you've got some ideas for how we think about a legacy for ourselves and how we think about what the long-term situation here is, what do we want to create and where are we going. So please give some thought, and suggestions would be most welcome with regards to how we can create that within one part of the planning session.
So we're already...
Email too, right?
Yeah, and we talked earlier today, and I think we're already just assuming we're going to grab a block of time, 90 minutes, 2 hours, something that will be sort of a strategic planning discussion. And I don't know what that is, I don't know what the topics are, but there's going to be a block of time that we know is going to be step back, get on the balcony, and start talking about long-range stuff. And then I'll put in the email, give me your big picture topics, and we'll vet those as well.
I had another one. It'll come back to me as we move on. So, facilitator. We had one last year. Our feeling is we don't need one this time around. Save the money. But if somebody feels differently, speak up. Now's your chance to. Okay.
We will go outside and have somebody come in to help us with the minutes. This is something I got to do for Allie. Allie, once again, is buried. You probably haven't heard, but Tammy is, the call of the baby has overwhelmed her. She's leaving us to go be a mom full time.
Oh, no.
And so this is a time when Allie doesn't need a whole other big pile of work. She's going to be solo until we get somebody else in.
Rich, can you specify in those minutes that there's a very quick turnover? It seems like it's a month and a half before we get those
Yeah.
minutes reviewed. So I'm talking about the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't
in a
think we
week
can
and
do
a
the
half.
next meeting, because they're like 7, 8, 9 pages, and staff needs to go through them, but we can we can get you maybe next meeting, but probably within 2 meetings, we can get them done.
Depending on what we come up with on the visioning process, I just want to, since you asked the question about facilitator, potentially during that point of view, it might be helpful to have somebody on that component.
Yeah, I've thought that too, because really to do it well, having somebody that's skilled in facilitating not a full strategic planning model, but the beginning of it is helpful. So I tend to agree. I'm not sure I'm the one to do that, and it's not something a mayor can do. The mayor, you should be a council member in one of these things. So let me put some thought to that. Maybe we can find somebody that's good at helping start the strategic planning discussion. We won't finish it, but having somebody who knows how to get a good start would be a good thing to do.
Debbie?
This may sound like an odd question. In fact, maybe it is. But, when we talk about envisioning, one of the things that strikes me in terms of how different Mercer Island is now, it is in terms of demographics. And there's a lot of speculation and conversation about what's happening to our population. And if there is data available, or could be available, it would be very helpful for me to see what people or professionals might think the island population might look like 20 years from now. Are we serving a community that is largely young families with small children, perhaps more like what we had in the 70s? Or are we looking at a continuation of an aging community, which will be me, and et cetera? So if there's something there, to me, that would be helpful, because I need to know who people think are going to be living here at that point.
We'll see what we can find. We can't, of course, create new data, but there's somebody out there that is writing about some of the futurists in the area, Glenn Heimstra. I mean, there are people out there that do this. Let me see what we can find that we could get into your packets.
Well, how would that be any different than what the school has already done?
Well, I'm not sure.
Maybe it's just that we haven't got into the nitty-gritty of what the school has done. We don't understand the demographic projections that the school has done.
Well, and we should go look at that, and as a matter of fact, that was on my list of things to try and get done between now, during this year, and so let me see what I can get done before this next planning session. But some good future thinking about demographics and demographic change would be helpful.
Okay, I guess 2 final things on our calendar. One to be aware of is the school district has their first meeting here in council chambers. Is it tomorrow?
Excellent.
It's coming up
Thursday?
Thursday?
No, next Monday.
Oh, next Monday. Okay, it's coming up though.
And
yeah,
that's another thanks to Allie. She's worked really hard with the district staff to make sure all the details have been worked out and all pull together an agreement that we have with them on the terms of how they do all this. All the mechanics have been worked out, and we're going to broadcast. They are going to broadcast from here, not us. This is turnkey. They are totally in charge of their own meetings, and.
I do think I'm going to try and come by just to give them a welcome. But if anybody else wants to join me, come up to the podium with me. We can say hello to them. So, and then finally on calendaring, you'll all know that you're invited to the mayor's house Friday night. My wife says bring something to drink. Food's not necessary, but it's entirely up to you. And definitely bring per person a white elephant gift of some nature, wrapped and ready to give away.
Sorry, so again, just to clear, per person versus per couple?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
There's not a name associated.
That's right. That's right.
But keep it clean, Councilmember Grady. Keep it clean.
It's all going to be Notre Dame stuff. I can see that.
Debbie.
One of the things, again, I'm going to take us back a little bit in the agenda here. It's the first time that on this side of the podium I will have been through an employee review I think it would be helpful if we could publicly cover at some point what that process is. Do I walk in there not knowing what kind of document is going to come? I think obviously, the criteria that's going to be used would be quite helpful. So bring in a little bit more transparency into the process and what happens on, not just the city manager, but any review that we might conduct or performance evaluation, so that there's just clear understanding everywhere.
Very good. Yeah, good idea. Board appointments, we have none. Council member reports. Mr. Grady, you want to start? Debbie?
I like the deer.
Ah.
They are up. And I also have to say, there's been a few questions out there about what would happen if one of them showed up with a temporary red nose. Yeah, so that's great. The one question also I have is I'm hoping at some point that there will be another school district and city council joint meeting or study session at some point soon. I know they've gone through a lot of phases of feedback, both on individual, small group, and large group basis. And to the extent that there's information that we should be aware of or that we could perhaps contribute or contemplate, that would be much appreciated.
Donna?
Just wanted to note that I was thrilled to see the pedestrian crossing signs put up on the 46th and 48th Street pedestrian refuges. So that's great. Hopefully people will notice those islands more and the potential pedestrians in them. And then, since it's our last December meeting, just want to say happy holidays.
Dan? Nothing. Jane?
Oh, I just wanted to acknowledge the topiaries also, if you haven't been by to see them. The grouping is called Gazing, as I understand it, and there will be a brass plaque placed near one of them, I guess, and also a little sign that says, "Do not climb on these deer." So anyway, I want to congratulate the Public Arts Committee of the Arts Council for handling all that, and especially to Ann Tootle, who was in charge and shepherded that project through. So,
April thanked me for the city putting out reindeer for the holidays.
Yes.
No, they're not reindeer. They're just deer. They'll be there for a while.
Mike? No? Okay. I guess my only report, I did attend a meeting, Mike McGinn and Skip Priest have pulled together this group to talk about transportation and trying hard to get lots of parties in agreement so that the state legislature sees a unified front as they begin to, in their session, and talk about things that cities and counties can do to enhance funding for roads and transportation. That is culminating in a letter that will be out, I think, in the next few days. And I'll strategize with leadership team here to figure out how we proceed with that, whether we try and bring that before council or not. I may get it out to you and then have individual conversations too, just to get a sense of things. So that's out there, and that's all I've got. With that, I think we are...
Mayor Bass, we just need to know if you're canceling the December 17th meeting.
Are we canceling the December 7th? Was it 17th meeting? Yeah. Okay. 'Tis done. Yes. Bah humbug. All right. With that, we are adjourned for the year. Thank you.